Hello there, and welcome to my channel. I'm so glad you found your way here today. Today we sit with one of the quietest mysteries the human mind keeps. It arrives without warning, lasts only a moment, and leaves nothing behind that you can hold. You have almost certainly felt it. A room you have never entered greets you like an old acquaintance. A conversation you are having for the first time seems to be one you have somehow had before. And in the same breath, you know that cannot be true. That small collision between a moment that is new and a feeling that insists it is not, is what we will explore together. We will move slowly from the strange toward the familiar, from the laboratory to your own ordinary evenings, gathering 100 quiet facts about the memory you cannot explain. And before we begin, if these calm explorations are something you enjoy, consider liking and subscribing. It helps others find their way here too. Now let's begin. Consider what must happen for this feeling to exist at all. Your mind has to do two opposite things in the same instant, and somehow register both. Picture standing in a stranger's kitchen late afternoon, light falling across a table you have never seen, when a deep certainty rises that you have stood in this exact spot before. This is the core of déjà vu, and it is easy to misread. It is not simply a sense of familiarity. It is familiarity arriving alongside the clear knowledge that the familiarity is false. Two judgments your brain normally keeps well apart are handed to you together in the same breath. Scientists define the experience in just these terms, as the strong sense of having already lived a moment that you know, with full confidence, is happening for the very first time. That contradiction is not a side effect of the experience. It is the experience. Take away the familiarity, and you are left with an ordinary new moment. Take away the certainty that the moment is new, and you are left with nothing stranger than remembering. Only when both hold at once does the feeling appear, which is why it has unsettled people for as long as anyone has thought to write it down. Picture a philosopher at his writing desk in the 1870s, composing a letter he expects only a few colleagues to read, choosing two small words almost in passing. He could not have known they would outlast him by more than a century. The phrase we now reach for so easily has a stranger past than its smooth French sound lets on. That man was Émile Boirac, and the words he set down, déjà vu, already seen, became the ones the whole world now uses. They entered print in a French philosophy journal in 1876 and slowly settled into the language of science. Yet Boirac was no cool laboratory figure. He gave much of his life to what was then called psychical research, the study of thought transference, hidden mental forces, and supposed powers that reached beyond the ordinary senses. He was convinced the mind held capacities that science had barely begun to chart. So the term we now use in clinics and brain imaging suites was handed down by someone leaning toward the very mysteries that careful researchers would later try to dissolve. There is a quiet irony in that lineage worth sitting with. The name that lets us speak of the experience plainly, almost clinically, came from a man certain the mind was far stranger than science allowed. The feeling has always lived on that border between what we can explain and what still pulls us toward the uncanny, and it carried that tension in its name from the very start. Here is something that sounds simple until you try to pin it down. Ask people whether they have ever felt this, and most will say yes. Think of a crowded room of strangers and imagine asking each of them in turn whether the sensation is known to them. Roughly 2 in every 3 people report having experienced it at least once, a figure that recurs across many surveys taken in different countries and decades. By most counts, it is among the most common odd experiences the healthy human mind produces. That seems like solid ground. It is not quite. When researchers look closely, the numbers scatter widely, from around a third of people in some studies to nearly everyone in others. The estimate shifts with how the question is worded, how the feeling is described, and whether people are simply asked to recall it or carefully guided toward what it means. and almost no two people describe it alike. One calls it eerie, another calls it strangely comforting. One locates it in a place, another in a passing conversation. The feeling is everywhere, yet it resists a single shared definition, slipping a little in everyone's hands. That scatter is itself a clue. An experience this common, yet this hard to fix to a number, tells us we're dealing with something private and fleeting, felt vividly in the moment, and almost impossible to hold still afterward. It is widespread, and it is never quite the same twice. It is gone almost before you can name it. That brevity is part of its character, and part of why it stayed in the shadows of science for so long. Think of how long this sensation actually lasts. Not a minute, not even close. A handful of seconds, sometimes only one or two, a flicker that ends the moment you turn your attention toward it. Déjà vu is by nearly every account an experience measured in seconds. It comes without warning, peaks at once, and fades just as quickly, leaving no trace you can examine later. You cannot summon it, cannot prolong it, cannot reliably reproduce it for anyone watching. For well over 100 years that made it almost useless to study. A phenomenon you cannot trigger and cannot sustain, offers science nothing to hold steady beneath a lens. So for a long stretch it was left to philosophers, novelists, and the merely curious, while laboratory researchers turned to problems they could actually control. Only in recent decades have a few clever methods finally coaxed a version of it into the lab. There is something fitting in this. The feeling that insists for an instant that time has folded back on itself, is itself almost too quick to catch in time. Its mystery and its brevity are not separate facts. They are the same fact. What makes it so hard to explain is in large part that it never lingers long enough to be properly seen. Long before brain scans or clinics, people were already trying to name this. The puzzle is far older than the science that now circles it. Picture a scholar in North Africa more than 1600 years ago, writing by lamplight, troubled by the way memory sometimes seems to lie. In the 4th century, the philosopher and theologian Augustine wrote about what he called falsi memoriae, false memories, moments when the mind feels certain it is recalling something it could not possibly have known. He was reaching, in his own words, and his own age, toward the same strange territory we still map today. And he was not alone across history. Before him, and long after, thinkers in many traditions noticed the same uncanny flicker and tried to fit it into their understanding of the soul of time, of fate. For most of those centuries, there was no neutral word for it. It was folded into ideas of prophecy, of past lives, of signals from beyond. The feeling was real and widely known. What was missing was a way to speak of it that did not already explain it away. That is what makes Augustine's phrase quietly remarkable. He did not solve it, and he did not pretend to. He simply marked it honestly as a fault in memory, a place where remembering and truth come apart. 16 centuries later, with all our instruments, that is still very close to where we stand. Turn your attention inward for a moment. When this feeling strikes, notice that you are doing two things at once that almost never happen together. There is the warm pull of recognition, the sense that this scene is known to you. And riding directly alongside it, there is a cooler voice insisting that the recognition makes no sense. This double awareness is the quiet engine of the whole experience. You are not merely feeling familiarity. You are feeling familiarity and judging it in the same breath, watching your own mind make a claim and rejecting that claim even as it forms. Psychologists call this kind of self-watching metacognition, the mind's ability to think about its own thinking. Most of the time it runs silently in the background, sorting the true from the false, without ever bothering you. Déjà vu is one of the rare moments when that background process steps briefly into the light. You feel it working. You catch your own mind in the act of checking itself, flagging a familiarity it cannot justify, and refusing to be taken in. There is something steadying in seeing it this way. The feeling can seem like a glitch, a small failure of the brain. But the part of you that knows the familiarity is false is not failing at all. It is doing its work perfectly, catching an error the rest of your mind has slipped into and quietly letting you know that something does not add up. For centuries, this feeling came with its explanation already attached. People did not ask what it was. They thought they knew. Imagine a traveler arriving in a town he has never visited, recognizing the turn of a street, and concluding without hesitation that he must have walked it in another life. Across many cultures and many ages, déjà vu was read as evidence of reincarnation, a memory leaking through from a previous existence. In others, it was a divine message, a brush with prophecy, a sign that fate had laid down this moment long ago. These readings were widespread, deeply felt, and rarely questioned. The feeling was treated not as a puzzle to solve, but as proof of something already believed. That is precisely what held science back. When an experience arrives wrapped so tightly in the supernatural, sober researchers tend to keep their distance, wary of the company the subject keeps. For a long time, to study déjà vu seriously was to risk being mistaken for someone who believed in past lives. The shift, when it finally came, was not about discovering the feeling, but about reclaiming it. Scientists had to peel away the inherited certainties and meet the experience as a plain fact of the human mind, neither magical nor meaningless. Only then could the real question surface. Not what the feeling proves about other worlds, but what it quietly reveals about this one, and about the ordinary machinery of remembering that every one of us carries. Now consider a far stranger source, one that turned this private flicker into something a doctor could almost predict. Think of a patient who feels, in the seconds before a seizure, an overwhelming sense that the present moment has all happened before, exactly like this down to the smallest detail. In some people living with temporal lobe epilepsy, déjà vu arrives as part of the aura, the warning that precedes a seizure. A small burst of abnormal electrical activity in the temporal lobe, the region tucked along the side of the brain, can reliably produce the feeling moments before the larger event. For these patients, it is not occasional or mysterious. It is a recognizable signal, tied to a specific place in the brain firing out of turn. This gave science something it had long lacked, a version of the experience with a known trigger and a known location. By studying where this electrical disturbance begins, researchers found that the temporal lobe, and especially the deep structures involved in memory and familiarity, sit close to the heart of the phenomenon. There is a quiet gift hidden in this difficult condition. What appears in most of us as a rare and untraceable flicker shows up here with a return address. The same feeling that once seemed to come from beyond the world turns out in these cases to come from a few square centimeters of living tissue briefly out of step. The mystery did not vanish. It simply moved indoors, into the brain itself. There is a pattern in who feels this most, and it runs against what you might guess. The feeling does not gather with the years. It quietly recedes. Picture a person in their early 20s who might meet this sensation several times a year, and the same person decades later, for whom it has grown rare, almost a memory of a memory. Surveys consistently find that déjà vu is reported most often by the young, peaking somewhere in the teens and 20s, then declining steadily across the rest of life. It is most common when memory is at its quickest and most active, and it fades as the years pass. This runs against the intuition that a feeling about the past should grow stronger with a longer past to draw on. The opposite holds true. Researchers read this as a meaningful clue rather than a curiosity. If déjà vu were simply old memories surfacing, the old with more memories stored should feel it most. They do not. The pattern instead suggests the feeling springs from a memory system working hard and fast, prone to the small momentary slips that a younger, busier mind makes more often. So the experience may be in its own quiet way a sign of vigor. Its presence speaks less of a haunted past than of a memory still moving briskly, still checking and sorting at speed, still occasionally tripping over its own swiftness. As that pace gradually eases with age, the feeling that depended on it grows quieter too. Try right now to give yourself this feeling. You cannot. And that simple impossibility has shaped the entire science around it. Imagine a researcher in a quiet lab, wanting nothing more than to watch déjà vu unfold under controlled conditions, and facing a subject in whom it stubbornly refuses to appear on cue. Déjà vu cannot be summoned by will. There is no thought you can think, no place you can visit, no memory you can rehearse that reliably brings it on. It comes unbidden, or it does not come at all, and it arrives in moments so ordinary that nothing marks them out in advance. For a science built on repetition and control, this is a profound obstacle. You cannot study at leisure what you cannot make happen. This single fact explains much about why understanding came so slowly. While other mental phenomena could be triggered, measured, and repeated, déjà vu sat just out of reach, appearing only when no one was prepared to record it. Decades of careful work were spent simply finding indirect ways around this wall, in epilepsy clinics, in surveys, and eventually in clever laboratory illusions. There is something fitting in the resistance. A feeling that plays with our sense of control over time refuses appropriately to submit to our control in the lab. It will not perform. It arrives on its own terms in the middle of the unremarkable, and is gone before you can hold it up to the light. The very quality that makes it haunting is the quality that made it so hard to know. Picture a meeting of physicians near the close of the 19th century, the air thick with formality, as one doctor rises to argue that a fleeting feeling most of them had dismissed deserved a place in medicine. That doctor was François-Léon Arnauld, and in 1896 he presented a detailed case to a French medical and psychological society, urging his colleagues to recognize the experience as a distinct phenomenon worthy of study. He pressed for the term déjà vu to be adopted as its proper name, lifting it from loose usage into something approaching a clinical category. His was among the first serious efforts to treat the feeling not as a quirk or an omen, but as a real subject for the new sciences of the mind. Arnauld spoke at a moment when psychology was just finding its feet, beginning to separate from philosophy on one side and from superstition on the other. Naming a thing precisely is the first step towards studying it carefully, and that was his quiet contribution. It would be many decades before the tools existed to follow where he pointed. But the act of standing before skeptical peers and insisting that this strange, brief sensation mattered, that it was common enough and real enough to name and examine, helped move déjà vu out of the realm of mysticism. He did not explain it. He did something quieter and in its way more lasting. He insisted it was worth explaining. Here is the part that fools nearly everyone. In the grip of déjà vu, many people feel certain they know what is about to happen next, as if the future were already written and they had merely read ahead. Picture someone in that moment breath, held convinced that the person across the room is about to turn left, about to say a particular word, about to make a gesture they have somehow already witnessed. That conviction feels overwhelming. Under careful testing it falls apart. When researchers placed people inside controlled situations designed to bring on the feeling, then asked them to actually predict what came next, those who reported the strong sense of foreknowledge performed no better than chance. The certainty was vivid. The accuracy was not there at all. This is one of the most quietly revealing findings in the whole field. The feeling of predicting the future is real as a feeling. As a power, it is empty. What people are experiencing is not knowledge of what comes next, but a strong sense of familiarity that the mind, reaching for an explanation, reshapes into a sense of prediction. It is a humbling thing to sit with. The conviction can be total and still be hollow. And that tells us something important about the mind in general, far beyond this one feeling. Our certainty about an experience and the truth of that experience are not the same thing, and they can come apart completely, even when everything inside us insists they are one. Sometimes, a novelist sees a thing more clearly than the scientists who come after. Long before the brain was scanned, a writer set the feeling down so exactly that the words still appear in research papers. Picture Charles Dickens at his desk in the 1840s, reaching for language to describe a sensation he assumed his readers would recognize without being told. In his novel David Copperfield, Dickens described the experience with such precision that psychologists studying déjà vu still cite the passage by name. He wrote of the feeling of having come to a place and done and said certain things long ago in some dim former time, and of knowing exactly what would be said next, as if it were suddenly recalled. He named the strange double quality, the familiarity and the false foreknowledge, decades before any laboratory put it to the test. This is why writers matter to the science here. The feeling is private, brief, and almost impossible to provoke on demand. For a long time, the most careful observations of it came not from instruments but from people whose whole craft was paying close attention to inner life and finding words for what others only half noticed. There is something humbling in that. A 19th-century novelist, working with nothing but attention and language, described the experience so faithfully that it still rings true against modern findings. The feeling has not changed across the centuries. Only our way of asking what it is has, and the old descriptions wait there quietly accurate for the science to catch up. Consider what part of the brain has to be involved for this feeling to exist at all. It must be the part whose ordinary job is to sort the old from the new. Imagine a quiet checkpoint deep in the brain, sorting every incoming moment, stamping each one as remembered or as happening for the first time, thousands of times an hour without your ever noticing. The structures most closely tied to déjà vu sit in the medial temporal lobe, the inner fold along the side of the brain that houses the hippocampus, and the nearby regions that handle memory and recognition. These are the very areas that normally distinguish a genuine memory from a fresh experience. When researchers study where the feeling originates, especially in epilepsy patients, these structures sit at the center of the picture. This matters because of what it implies. Déjà vu is not produced by some exotic separate faculty. It emerges from the ordinary apparatus of memory itself, the same circuitry running quietly in you at this very moment, doing its constant work of telling now from then. So the feeling is less an intrusion than a brief disturbance in something always present. The machinery that decides whether a moment is familiar is the machinery that for a second or two gets it wrong. There is a strange intimacy in that. The eeriest sensation the mind produces comes from its most dependable equipment, briefly out of true, and the place it comes from is the same place that 10,000 times today has quietly gotten it right. You might expect a feeling this common to yield a steady number when counted. It does not. Ask how many people have felt déjà vu, and the answer slides depending on how you frame the question. Picture two researchers conducting the same basic survey on opposite sides of a country, one finding that barely a third of people report it, the other finding that almost all of them do. Across the body of research, estimates of how many people have experienced déjà vu range from roughly a third to nearly the entire population. The spread is enormous, and it does not come from people changing. It comes from the asking. A vivid leading description draws more yeses. A bare, cautious one draws fewer. Whether you simply ask if it has ever happened, or carefully define what it is first, moves the number sharply. This is a quiet lesson about studying any inner experience. The feeling lives inside a person, untouchable from outside, and the only window we have is the question we put to them. The shape of that question colors everything that comes back through it. It also tells us something gentle about the feeling itself. It is common enough that described well, almost anyone recognizes it. Yet, it is faint and slippery enough that described plainly, many let it pass unclaimed. The truth likely sits somewhere in that wide band, in a feeling familiar to most of us, yet so brief and so private that we are never quite sure how to count it. Here is a connection that hints at something deeper, linking the feeling to the strangest hours of your day, the ones spent asleep. Think of someone who wakes most mornings with their dreams still vivid, the colors and faces lingering through breakfast, and who also tends to feel déjà vu more often than those whose nights pass blank. Studies have found that people who recall their dreams frequently and vividly report déjà vu more often than those who rarely remember dreaming at all. The two experiences, so different on the surface, appear to travel together, which suggests they may draw on some of the same underlying mental machinery. The link is not yet fully understood and researchers are careful here, but the overlap is suggestive. Both involve memory behaving unusually. Both blur the line between what was truly experienced and what only feels as though it was. A dream can lend a face or a place a false sense of familiarity, much as déjà vu lends an ordinary moment one. Perhaps the same systems that stitch together the loose, recombined memories of dreaming also produce now and then the waking flicker we are exploring. There is a quiet wholeness in this. The mind does not keep its strange experiences in separate rooms. The vividness of your dreaming and the eeriness of your déjà vu may be two expressions of a single shared way your memory has of working, surfacing once in the dark and once briefly in the light of an ordinary day. Most of us meet this feeling a few times a year and think little of it. But imagine it never letting go, turning the simplest daily acts into something unbearable. Picture a man opening his morning newspaper, beginning the first story, and feeling with total certainty that he has read this exact article before every line of it, until at last he stops reading the news altogether because none of it can feel new. This is drawn from documented cases of what researchers call persistent or chronic déjà vu, a rare condition in which the feeling does not flicker and fade, but settles in and stays. Some affected people abandon newspapers, television, or shopping because each fresh experience arrives stamped with a false certainty that it has all happened before. They are not confused about facts. They simply cannot shake the overwhelming sense of repetition that coats everything they encounter. These cases are difficult, and they are also deeply revealing. They show what the ordinary, fleeting version spares us. For most people, the feeling is brief, precisely because the mind's reality checking quickly reasserts itself, correcting the false familiarity within seconds. When that correction fails, we see what the feeling would be if it never let go. The same sensation that in passing can seem almost wondrous becomes, when constant, a kind of imprisonment, where nothing is ever permitted to be new. It is a quiet reminder that the brevity of normal déjà vu is not a limitation. It is a mercy and a sign that the system is working as it should. If you want a sense of how the feeling might actually arise, one of the leading explanations turns on a delicate matter of timing. Imagine two runners who are meant to cross a line together, perfectly matched stride for stride, and one of them arriving just a fraction of a second early. A prominent account of déjà vu, often called the dual process idea, holds that two normally synchronized aspects of memory briefly come apart. One process gives you the sense that something is familiar. Another retrieves the actual content, the where and when and how you know it. In ordinary remembering, these arrive together, so familiarity comes bound to its source. The idea is that in déjà vu, the sense of familiarity fires, while the retrieval of any real source does not follow. Researchers still treat this as a leading proposal rather than a settled fact, and they continue to test it. If something like this is right, it would explain the experience's odd shape with some elegance. You feel the strong pull of recognition because the familiarity signal has fired. But there is nothing behind it, no memory to point to because the matching content never came. So you are left holding a familiarity with no past attached. That would make déjà vu not a false memory at all, but a familiarity that has lost its memory, a signal cut loose from the thing it was meant to be tied to. The feeling of knowing arrives intact and complete. It simply arrives alone with no story to explain why you should know this moment at all. There is a pattern tied to motion to leaving home that researchers have noticed, but cannot fully untangle. People who travel widely seem to meet this feeling more often. Picture someone stepping off a train in a foreign city they have never visited, looking down an unfamiliar street, and feeling the ground shift slightly as the place greets them like somewhere already known. Surveys have found that people who travel more frequently report déjà vu more often than those who rarely leave familiar surroundings. The link is real in the data. What it means is far less clear. It could be that new places full of fresh arrangements of streets and rooms and faces simply offer the feeling more openings, more novel scenes, for an old sense of familiarity to attach itself to wrongly. Or the connection could run through something else entirely. People who travel tend to be younger, more curious, more open to new experience, and all of those traits are themselves tied to reporting déjà vu more often. The travel may not cause the feeling at all. It may simply keep company with the kind of person and the kind of mind in which the feeling already tends to stir. Researchers are honest about not knowing which it is, and there is something fitting in that uncertainty. A feeling that plays on the sense of having been somewhere before is itself most at home in the unfamiliar, in the very places we have genuinely never been. The stranger, the surroundings, it seems, the more room there is for that quiet illusion of return. Now we come to one of the most extraordinary chapters in this whole story, a moment when a doctor reached into the living brain, and the past seemed to rise up under his hand. Picture an operating room in the 1950s. A patient awake and calm, the skull open, as a surgeon touches a fine electrode to the surface of the brain, and the patient suddenly describes a vivid, familiar scene unfolding before them. The surgeon was Wilder Penfield, working in Montreal, and in the course of treating epilepsy, he made a remarkable discovery. By applying gentle electrical stimulation to parts of the temporal lobe in conscious patients, he could provoke vivid experiential responses, including sensations of familiarity and the feeling that a moment had happened before. Patients sometimes reported flashbacks or a powerful sense of déjà vu arising directly from his touch. Because the patients were awake, they could describe what they felt in the moment. This was a turning point. It showed plainly and physically that the feeling could be generated from within the brain by stimulating specific tissue, with no mystical source required at all. The temporal lobe, touched in the right place, gave up the sensation on command. Penfield's work moved déjà vu decisively from the realm of the supernatural into the realm of biology. What people had taken for centuries as a message from beyond turned out to be something a faint current could call forth from a few folds of living matter in a quiet room under a careful hand. For every feeling there is often an opposite, and déjà vu has one that is just as unsettling, perhaps more so. It runs the other way entirely. Picture sitting in your own kitchen, a room you have known for years, when it abruptly seems wrong, unrecognizable, as if you had been set down in a stranger's house wearing the shape of your own. This is jamais vu, French for never seen, and it is the mirror image of déjà vu. Where déjà vu makes the new feel old, jamais vu makes the deeply familiar feel suddenly strange and unknown. A face you know well, a word you have used your whole life, a place you have lived in for years, can momentarily lose its sense of familiarity and stand before you as something foreign. It is rarer than déjà vu, or at least reported less often, but researchers regard the two as closely related two faces of the same underlying process. In both, the brain's sense of familiarity has come unfastened from reality. In one case, it fires when it should not. In the other, it falls silent when it should not. There is something quietly profound in the pair. Together they reveal that familiarity is not a fixed property of the world, but a judgment the mind is constantly making, and one that can fail in either direction. The known can feel strange, and the strange can feel known. What we take for solid recognition turns out to be a verdict the brain renders fresh, moment by moment, and occasionally gets exactly backward. Step back from any one country now, and notice something about how widely this feeling reaches. It belongs to no single people. It belongs to all of them. Imagine the same flicker of false recognition passing through a fisherman on one coast, a city worker on another, a child in a mountain village, none of them sharing a language, all of them touched by the same brief sense of return. Déjà vu has been described across cultures around the world, in many different languages and traditions. The experience appears to be a basic feature of the human mind, rather than the product of any one society's beliefs or habits. Even where no single neat word exists to name it, people recognize the sensation the moment it is described to them. It is telling, in fact, that the term the whole world now reaches for is borrowed from French, adopted into language after language, because so many tongues lacked a word of their own for something everyone seemed to know. The feeling outran the vocabulary. People had the experience long before they had the name. This universality points to something deep. Déjà vu is not a quirk of one culture's imagination or one era's superstition. It rises from the shared architecture of the human brain, the same memory machinery carried by every person alive. Whatever language you think in, whatever stories you were raised on, that quiet flicker of impossible familiarity can find you. It is one of the small, strange things that being human holds in common. There are conditions that make this feeling more likely to slip through, and you have almost certainly been in them. They are the ordinary states of a tired, pressured life. Think of the end of a long, draining day, when you are running low, your attention frayed, your mind stretched thin, and the world takes on a faint blur at its edges. People tend to report déjà vu more often when they are tired, stressed, or mentally fatigued. These states appear to make the experience more likely, as though weariness loosens something in the ordinarily tight coordination of memory and perception. When the mind is taxed, its constant background sorting of the familiar from the new seems to grow a little more prone to slips. This fits the picture that has been building. If déjà vu arises from a brief misfiring in the systems that judge familiarity, then anything that wears down those systems should make the misfire more likely. Fatigue and stress are exactly the conditions under which attention wavers and mental processes fall slightly out of step. There is a quiet reassurance in knowing this. The feeling that can seem so uncanny, so suggestive of something beyond the ordinary, tends to visit most when you are simply worn out. It is not a sign that the veil has thinned or that fate is speaking. More often, it is a sign that you are tired, that your mind has been working hard, and that one of its many quiet processes has, for a second, briefly slipped its footing. Here is an explanation so simple, it almost feels like cheating, yet it accounts for a great deal. It turns on the difference between seeing and noticing. Picture walking into a busy restaurant, your eyes sweeping the far wall for a moment while your attention is fixed on finding your friend, and then seconds later settling on that same wall and feeling sure you have seen it somewhere before. This is the heart of what researchers sometimes call the divided attention or inattention idea. The proposal is that you take in a scene briefly at the edge of awareness, without consciously registering it. Then moments later you give it your full attention, and the second look carries the faint trace of the first. Your brain recognizes the scene as familiar correctly, but cannot locate the source because the original glimpse was never consciously stored. So you are left with a true familiarity attached to a moment you believe you are seeing for the first time. The recognition is real. Only the timeline is hidden. You did see it before, just seconds ago and just below the threshold of noticing. It is a quietly deflating explanation in the best sense. The feeling that seems to reach across years or lifetimes may in many cases reach back only a heartbeat or two to a glance you never knew you took. The mind is not breaking the rules of time. It is simply keeping a faster record than your awareness can follow, and now and then it lets that record show. You can produce a small cousin of this strangeness yourself right now, with nothing but a single word and a little repetition. The familiar will start to dissolve in your hands. Take an ordinary word, something plain like door. and say it aloud over and over 20 or 30 times until the sound loosens from its meaning and becomes a strange arrangement of noises in your mouth. This is a well-documented effect that psychologists call semantic satiation, and it is a close relative of jamais vu, the sense of the familiar turning foreign. When a word is repeated enough, its meaning temporarily fades, and what is left feels oddly unfamiliar, almost meaningless. The word has not changed. Your sense of knowing, it has. What makes this worth dwelling on is how easily it can be triggered, unlike déjà vu itself. Here is a small, reliable demonstration that familiarity is not fixed but generated, and that it can be worn down or knocked loose by something as ordinary as repetition. The feeling of knowing a word is a process, and you have just briefly exhausted it. That is the quiet revelation hidden in such a simple game. The solidity of the familiar, the sense that you know this word, this face, this place is not a permanent fact stamped on the world. It is a judgment your mind keeps making and remaking fresh each time. Press on it just slightly, and it wavers. Déjà vu and its mirror are simply that same wavering, arriving on its own, when you were not pressing at all. For a century, the great frustration was that this feeling could not be summoned. In recent years, researchers found a clever side door, a way to coax a version of it into being. Imagine sitting in a quiet study room reading or hearing a list of related words, bed rest, tired dream, night, and later feeling certain that the word sleep was among them, though it never was. This is built on a long-studied memory illusion, in which lists of associated words reliably produce false recognition of a word that fits the theme but was never presented. Researchers studying déjà vu adapted this approach to create a controlled sense of familiarity without a real source. Participants feel they recognize something, while also knowing in some versions that they should not. The lab finally had a way to produce the core ingredient of déjà vu on demand, even if a perfect copy of the feeling remains elusive. This was a genuine breakthrough in a field long starved of control. For the first time, the essential mechanism familiarity, untethered from a true memory, could be generated reliably and studied closely rather than waited for in vain. It does not capture the full eeriness of the spontaneous experience, and researchers are careful to say so, but it brings the heart of the matter into the open. The feeling of knowing without a reason to know can be manufactured from a simple list of words, which tells us the experience is not magic at all. It is a property of memory, one that can be lured into the light and watched at work. Now look at what actually lights up inside the head when this happens, because the answer overturns what almost everyone would guess. The active region is not the one you would expect. Picture a person lying still inside a brain scanner, a laboratory version of déjà vu, induced while researchers watch which areas of the brain quietly brighten on their screens. In imaging studies of déjà vu and related familiarity illusions, the regions that become most active are often not the memory centers themselves, but areas in the frontal lobes, the parts of the brain involved in decision-making, monitoring, and conflict detection. The memory structures stay comparatively quiet. What lights up is the machinery that checks and judges. This is a striking and counterintuitive result. We tend to imagine déjà vu as a memory malfunction, a glitch in the storehouse of the past. The scans suggest something different. The activity sits in the regions that evaluate whether a memory makes sense, that monitor for error, that catch and resolve conflict between competing signals. So the brightest part of the experience may not be the false familiarity at all. It may be your brain noticing that the familiarity is false, flagging the contradiction, working to sort out a signal that does not add up. The eeriness you feel might be the felt edge of that frontal machinery doing its job, far from a failure of memory. The experience may be the sound of the mind's quality control briefly, audibly at work. Let that last finding settle, because it changes the entire character of the experience. The thing that feels like a glitch may be the opposite of one. Imagine, an inspector on a quiet production line, who almost never has to act, but who, at one moment, spots a single piece that does not belong, and quietly flags it, doing exactly what the inspector is there to do. Drawing the threads together here is what the science increasingly suggests. If déjà vu involves a false signal of familiarity, and if the brain regions most active during it are those that monitor for error, then the feeling may be the experience of your mind catching its own mistake. The familiarity fires wrongly. The frontal machinery notices the wrongness. And what you feel, that strange unease, is the catching itself. This reframes the whole experience in a gentler light. For centuries, the feeling was read as a haunting, a breach, a sign that something had gone amiss with reality or the soul. The emerging view turns this around. Déjà vu may be a sign of a system working well, a memory check that not only flags a false familiarity, but lets you feel it doing so. There is real comfort in that. The next time the world briefly insists you have been here before, and you know that you have not, that small, clear voice of doubt is not a flaw. It is your mind, faithful and alert, refusing to be fooled, and quietly letting you in on the moment it declined to believe a lie. Researchers found another way to summon this feeling, not with words but with space itself, by building rooms inside a machine. The trigger turned out to be shape. Picture someone wearing a headset, walking through a virtual courtyard, then later entering a completely different scene. A garden, a museum that secretly shares the same hidden floor plan, the same arrangement of paths and walls. In studies using virtual reality, researchers found they could reliably bring on a sense of déjà vu by leading people through a new environment whose spatial layout matched an earlier one they had explored but did not consciously remember. The new scene looked entirely different on the surface. Underneath its structure echoed the old one, and that hidden resemblance was enough to produce the feeling of having been there before. This is one of the cleanest demonstrations yet of where the experience can come from. The familiarity attaches not to any object you could point to, but to the underlying shape of a place, the relationships between its parts. When a new scene quietly mirrors the geometry of one you have forgotten, your brain registers the match as familiarity, even though you cannot say why. It suggests that déjà vu, at least in this form, is a recognition of structure outrunning your awareness of it. You have in a sense been here before, not in this room but in one shaped like it. The feeling is not false after all. It is a true echo of a pattern you met once and never knew you kept. Stay with that idea of shape a little longer, because it tells us something precise about what actually triggers the feeling. It is never the thing you would point to. Picture standing in a hotel lobby that stirs the sensation, and trying afterward to say what made it familiar, and finding that no single chair or lamp or color was the cause, only something about how it all fit together. The virtual reality work and related studies point to a clear answer. The familiarity in déjà vu often attaches to the overall configuration of a scene, the spatial relationships among its elements, rather than to any individual object within it. It is the arrangement that matches the layout, the way the parts stand in relation to one another, not the parts themselves. This is why the feeling is so hard to explain in the moment. You scan the room for the source of the recognition and find nothing, because the source is not a thing at all. It is a pattern distributed across the whole scene, registered by your brain below the level where you could ever name it. There is something quietly elegant in this. Your mind is constantly reading the deep structure of the spaces you move through, the grammar of how rooms and streets are put together far beneath your notice. Déjà vu is one of the few moments that hidden reading surfaces. The feeling has no nameable cause because it lives in the relationships between things in the shape of the whole, which you absorbed without ever knowing you were doing so. Return for a moment to that powerful sense of foreknowledge, because researchers put it directly to the test, and the result is worth meeting head-on. Imagine a volunteer walking through one of those virtual scenes, gripped by the feeling certain they know which way the next corridor will bend, asked to call it before they reach the corner. When researchers tested this, the people who reported the strongest sense that they could predict what came next turned out to guess no more accurately than chance. The conviction of foreknowledge was vivid and real as a feeling. The actual ability to foresee the next turn simply was not there. They felt they knew. They did not. This experiment matters because it confronts the most seductive part of the whole experience, the quiet suspicion that déjà vu offers a glimpse of the future. Tested carefully, that suspicion collapses. What people are experiencing is a strong sense of familiarity, which the mind, reaching to make sense of it, reshapes into a feeling of prediction after the fact. It is a clean and honest finding, and a humbling one. The certainty can be total and still be empty, and that gap between how sure we feel and how right we are reaches far beyond this one experience. Here it is laid bare in a single clean test. The feeling of knowing the future is genuine. The knowing is not. What déjà vu offers is not a window forward in time, but a vivid lesson in how convincingly the mind can feel certain of something that is not so. There is a subtle trick of timing inside this feeling of prediction, and once you see it, the whole illusion comes apart in your hands. The prophecy always arrives late. Think back to a time the feeling struck, and try to recall honestly when the sense of knowing what came next actually appeared. Almost always it was after the thing had already happened, not before. This is a quiet but telling feature of déjà vu. The conviction that you predicted the moment tends to form just after the moment unfolds, not genuinely in advance of it. As each new instant arrives, wrapped in false familiarity, your mind reads that familiarity as foreknowledge, and concludes in retrospect that you must have known it was coming. The sense of having predicted is stitched on a half-second too late to be real prediction at all. It is the same illusion that runs through so much of how we understand our own lives. After something happens, it can feel as though we saw it coming, even when we did not. Déjà vu compresses that ordinary trick of hindsight into a few seconds and makes it vivid. And this is why the feeling of prophecy never holds up to testing. It cannot, because it is not really aimed at the future. It is aimed backward at the moment just gone, dressing up a familiarity that came too late into a foresight that was never there. The future was never glimpsed, only the past falsely felt, and then misread as a prediction it could not have been. Writers keep reaching this territory before the scientists, and one phrase coined 2 centuries ago still describes the feeling almost perfectly. It carries the whole strangeness in 2 words. Picture a reader in the early 19th century, coming across the phrase, a sense of pre-existence, and recognizing instantly the eerie feeling it named, the sense of having somehow existed in this moment before. The English novelist and poet Sir Walter Scott used this notion in his writing to capture the experience, describing the strange impression of having lived a moment in some earlier time. Long before any clinical term took hold, that phrase, a sense of pre-existence, gave readers a way to hold the feeling in language. It names the core of it cleanly. The impression that the present somehow predates itself, that you arrive at a moment already carrying it. This is part of a long thread we have been following, of poets and novelists describing the experience with a precision the science would only later confirm. They could not explain it, but they could feel it exactly, and find words faithful enough that those words still ring true today. There is a reason such phrases endure. The feeling itself has not changed across the centuries, only our theories about it. A writer 200 years ago and a researcher with a brain scanner are looking at the same thing. And sometimes the older language, a sense of pre-existence, catches the lived texture of it more truly than any clinical definition ever could, holding the mystery whole rather than dissolving it. We touched on the persistent form earlier, but it is worth meeting more fully, because it shows the feeling at its most consuming, no longer a flicker, but a flood. Picture someone for whom every single day arrives stamped with certainty that it has all happened before, every meal, every conversation, every walk, lived already exactly like this, with no escape into anything new. In rare cases of chronic or persistent déjà vu, people experience the feeling not as an occasional second-long flicker, but as a near-constant condition. They may become convinced that they have already lived through whatever is happening, that each new event is a repetition of one before. Some grow so certain of this that they stop seeking out new experiences entirely, since nothing to them can feel genuinely new. The condition has been documented in older adults and linked in some cases to memory and neurological changes. What makes these cases so striking is the contrast with the ordinary experience. For most of us, the saving grace of déjà vu is its brevity, the way the mind's reality check quickly dissolves, the false familiarity. Here that check fails or never comes, and the feeling fills everything. It reveals by its absence how much the fleeting version depends on a correction we never notice happening. The brief flicker, we know, is held in check by a system that constantly restores our sense of the new. When that system gives way, the result is a life in which nothing arrives fresh, and the strangeness that once lasted seconds becomes the whole texture of a day. There is a small set of cases where this feeling appeared not from the brain alone, but from outside. It switched on by a substance. The trigger came from a bottle. Picture a healthy person, no history of anything unusual, who begins a course of medication and suddenly finds themselves flooded with recurrent, intense déjà vu, the feeling firing again and again where it never had before. In a small number of documented reports, people taking certain medications, including some combinations of drugs, developed unusually frequent and intense déjà vu as an effect. When the medication was stopped, the experiences faded. The feeling had been induced in effect by the chemistry the drugs introduced, as though a familiarity signal had been turned on and left running. These cases are rare, and researchers treat them carefully rather than drawing sweeping conclusions. But they add another piece to the picture we have been assembling. They show once more that déjà vu has physical roots, that it can be produced and removed by altering the brain's chemistry, just as it can be provoked by electrical stimulation or by structural quirks of memory. It is one more quiet step away from the supernatural readings of the past. A feeling once taken as a message from beyond can be switched on by a pill and switched off by stopping it. Whatever déjà vu is, it lives in the physical brain, responsive to current and chemistry alike, a part of the body's workings, rather than a visitor from somewhere outside them. Here is something about this feeling that has nothing to do with the brain and everything to do with us. We tend to keep it to ourselves. Picture the moment passing through someone in the middle of an ordinary conversation, the small inward jolt of it, and then the decision almost automatic to say nothing, to let it go unmentioned. For all that déjà vu is one of the most common, odd experiences the human mind produces, most people who feel it rarely speak of it to anyone. It arrives, it unsettles, and it slips away unspoken, partly because it is so brief, and partly because it feels too strange, too hard to put into words, too likely to sound foolish, said aloud. There is a quiet irony in this silence. The feeling that touches roughly 2/3 of all people is treated by nearly each of them as a private oddity, almost a secret, as though they alone were prone to it. The very universality of the experience is hidden by the reluctance to mention it. Think for a moment about how many people around you in any crowd carry this same unspoken flicker, this same small mystery they assume is theirs alone. The strangeness that makes you hesitate to describe it is the very strangeness nearly everyone else has also felt and also kept quiet. It is one of the most shared experiences we have, and one of the least spoken. A common thread we each tend to hold as if it were ours alone. Given how old this mystery is, you might assume the serious study of it stretches back centuries. It does not. The first full scholarly book came astonishingly late. Picture the long shelf of human knowledge, thick with volumes on memory and mind, reaching back generations, and on the subject of déjà vu alone, no dedicated scholarly book at all until well within living memory. It was not until 1983 that the first scholarly book devoted entirely to déjà vu was published, a work that gathered and organized what was then known and helped mark the experience as a legitimate subject for study. For a feeling described by Augustine, named in the 1870s, and discussed by physicians in the 1890s, that is a remarkably late arrival for the first full-length scientific treatment. The lateness tells its own story, the one we have been tracing throughout. For most of its history, déjà vu was held at arm's length by serious researchers, too tangled in superstition, too brief to capture, too slippery to measure. It lingered at the edges of science, acknowledged but unstudied. That single book helped change this signaling that the experience could be approached carefully and systematically, rather than left to mystics and novelists. The real flowering of research came later, still in the 2000s, once clever experiments and brain imaging opened doors that had stayed shut for a century. The mystery is ancient. The science is young, still finding its footing, still early in its work of understanding something humanity has felt for as long as it has thought. Notice what déjà vu tends to fasten itself to, because there is a clear pattern, and it points back towards space and setting rather than people or words. It is a feeling about where, not what. Imagine the moments in your own life when it struck, and notice how often they involved a setting, a room, a street, a view, rather than a fact you were recalling or a single face before you. Déjà vu is predominantly an experience of scenes and places. It tends to arise in connection with a setting, an environment, the overall feel of where you are, rather than attaching to an isolated fact, a name, or a particular object. People describe it as a sense that they have been here before in this place, in this configuration, more often than a sense that they have heard this exact fact before. This fits everything we have gathered about its roots. If the feeling springs from the brain's reading of spatial structure, from layouts and arrangements registered below awareness, then it makes sense that it would cling most naturally to places and scenes where that structure lives. There is something fitting in that too. Memory is woven deeply into space. We remember our lives partly as a series of places, rooms we lived in, paths we walked, views we returned to. Déjà vu, that strange counterfeit of remembering, follows the same grain. It tends to settle where real memory settles most heavily, in the feel of a place, which may be why it so often arrives as the quiet, disorienting sense that this particular here has somehow held you before. Return to the operating room one more time, because the work begun by Penfield grew more precise, until researchers could point to particular tissue and bring the feeling forth from it. Picture a patient awake during brain monitoring electrodes, resting against specific folds of the temporal lobe, and a faint current delivered to one spot, producing again and again that unmistakable sense of having been here before. Building on the early discoveries, researchers using electrical stimulation in epilepsy patients have been able to provoke déjà vu by stimulating particular regions of the medial temporal lobe, including structures deep within it tied to familiarity and memory. The feeling can be elicited with some reliability from these specific sites. In patients who have agreed to such monitoring as part of their care, stimulate the right place, and the sensation appears. This refined the picture considerably. It is not merely that the temporal lobe is involved in some vague way. Particular structures, when activated, generate the feeling directly, which has helped researchers map where in the brain familiarity is judged, and where that judgment can go astray. There is a strange intimacy in this kind of knowledge, the most uncanny feeling the mind produces, the one that for centuries seemed to come from beyond, can be called up by a careful touch to a known location in living tissue. The mystery has an address now, a few specific folds deep in the brain. Knowing where it lives does not lessen the wonder. It relocates it, from somewhere beyond the world to somewhere deep inside the head. There is a question hidden in the lives of children that turns out to be quietly profound. When does a person first become capable of feeling this at all? Picture a young child fully alive to the world, delighted and curious, and yet seemingly untouched by the particular strangeness of déjà vu, which appears to belong to a slightly later stage of the mind. Very young children rarely report déjà vu, and the feeling appears to emerge only later, typically beginning to show up around the ages of 6 to 10, becoming more common into adolescence. The youngest children may not experience it at all. Something has to be in place first, some development of memory and self-awareness before the feeling becomes possible. Researchers find this revealing. Déjà vu requires not just memory, but the capacity to monitor memory, to feel that something is familiar, and simultaneously judge that the familiarity is false. That double awareness, the ability to reflect on one's own mental states, develops gradually through childhood. A very young child may simply lack the machinery to feel the contradiction at the heart of the experience. So the arrival of déjà vu in a young life is, in its quiet way, a small milestone. It marks a mind grown able to watch itself, to hold a feeling and question it in the same breath. The eerie sensation that can unsettle us is also a faint sign of a deeper capacity coming online, the capacity to notice our own remembering and now and then to catch it in a beautiful, harmless mistake. We have seen how seizures can produce this feeling in some people. That connection has led to a quiet, intriguing idea about the ordinary version that visits the rest of us. Picture the same kind of small electrical disturbance that in epilepsy precedes a seizure, but happening so faintly, so briefly in a healthy brain, that it produces only a flicker of feeling and nothing more. Some neurologists have suggested that ordinary, everyday déjà vu in healthy people might be a brief, harmless version of the same temporal lobe activity that produces déjà vu as a seizure aura. The idea is that a small, fleeting burst of irregular activity in the memory regions, far too slight to cause a seizure, could momentarily produce the familiarity signal on its own. This remains a proposal under discussion rather than an established fact, and researchers hold it carefully. If something like it is right, it would draw a quiet line between the rare clinical experience and the common human one, suggesting they share a mechanism and differ only in degree. The seizure aura would be a strong version of what passes through all of us faintly now and then. There is a certain reassurance in the framing, even in its uncertainty. The feeling that can seem so strange might be at bottom a tiny electrical hiccup in a healthy brain, gone in an instant, leaving no harm behind. Not a breach in reality, not a message, but a small flicker in the same circuitry that turned up far higher, signals something serious, and turned down to almost nothing. Simply gives us a moment to wonder at. Set aside the mechanics for a moment, and consider how the feeling actually feels, because there is a particular emotional color to it that nearly everyone knows. It carries a quiet chill. Picture the small shiver that runs through a person when it strikes a faint prickle of the uncanny, the sense that something has briefly slipped out of its proper order. Déjà vu is rarely neutral. It tends to arrive wrapped in a distinct emotional tone, an eeriness, a quiet strangeness, a feeling that something is not quite right with the moment. Most people recognize this texture instantly, even if they struggle to describe the experience itself. It is not frightening exactly, but it is unsettling, touched with the uncanny. That emotional charge is part of what makes the feeling so memorable despite its brevity, and part of why for so long it was read as significant, as a sign of something beyond the ordinary. The eeriness seems to demand an explanation larger than mere memory. But the chill may have a simpler source than the supernatural readings supposed. If the experience involves your mind detecting a contradiction, sensing that a familiarity has fired where none should, then the unease may be the felt edge of that detected conflict. The strangeness is the feeling of your own mind registering that something does not add up. Seen this way, the eeriness is not a message from elsewhere. It is the emotional signature of an error caught in the act, the quiet alarm that sounds when recognition and reality fail for a second to agree. Among the many attempts to explain this feeling, there is an older idea built on the notion of a tiny delay, a fraction of a second of mismatch inside the brain. It is elegant, and it did not survive. Imagine information from your two eyes or your two brain hemispheres, meant to arrive together in perfect step, and one stream lagging the other by the briefest sliver of time. One older explanation proposed that déjà vu arose from a small timing mismatch, perhaps between the two hemispheres of the brain, or between two pathways carrying the same information, so that one copy of an experience arrived a fraction of a second after the other. The delayed copy, the idea went, would feel like a memory of the first, producing the sense that the moment had happened before. It was a tidy proposal, and for a time it drew interest. The trouble was that the evidence never quite held together. The timing theory struggled to account for the details of the experience, and it was gradually set aside, as other explanations, grounded in familiarity and memory monitoring, gained better support. This is worth noting not because the theory was right, but because it shows how science works on a problem like this. Ideas are proposed, tested, against what can be observed, and quietly abandoned when they do not fit, while better ones take their place. The history of explaining déjà vu is a history of careful proposals rising and falling. The timing idea was one such attempt, reasonable in its day, now mostly retired, a reminder that understanding advances by letting go of explanations that no longer earn their keep. For all the laboratory cleverness that came later, much of what we understand about this feeling came first from people for whom it was not occasional but medical. They opened the clearest window. Picture a patient in a clinic, describing to a doctor the strange, overwhelming sense of repetition that arrives in the moments before a seizure, recounting it precisely because for them it is a recurring and recognizable event. People living with temporal lobe epilepsy have contributed enormously to the science of déjà vu. Because the feeling can occur reliably, as part of their seizure aura tied to a known location and a known cause, researchers have been able to study it in a way that the rare untriggerable version in healthy people never allowed. These patients gave the experience a foothold in medicine, a place where it could be observed, located, and understood. It was through their seizures that the temporal lobe was identified as central to the feeling. It was during their brain monitoring that stimulation could provoke it on command. Much of the map we now have was drawn from their experiences. There is a quiet debt in this worth acknowledging. A difficult condition carried by particular people became the window through which everyone's experience grew clearer. The flicker that passes through most of us harmlessly and unstudiably could be examined at all largely because for some it arrives with a cause we can find. What we understand about this small common mystery, we owe in no small part to those for whom it was never small, and never quite a mystery, but a familiar sign of something far harder to live with. Déjà vu belongs to a small family of related experiences, and one of its closest cousins is a feeling you have certainly known, the sense of something hovering just beyond your reach. You have felt this one too. Picture a name on the very edge of memory, a word you know circling close, refusing to land, present in every way except the one that matters. That maddening state has a name, the tip of the tongue phenomenon, and researchers see it as kin to déjà vu. Both involve a strong sense of knowing, without the content arriving to back it up. In tip of the tongue, you feel certain you know a word, you can sense its shape, its first letter, its rhythm, yet you cannot retrieve it. The familiarity is there. The substance is missing. This kinship is revealing. It suggests that the feeling of knowing is a separate thing from the knowledge itself, a signal that can fire on its own, detached from any actual content. In tip of the tongue, the feeling of knowing a word arrives without the word. In déjà vu, the feeling of having known a moment arrives without any real memory of it. Both pull back the curtain on the same quiet truth. Your sense that you know something is not the knowledge. It is a separate signal generated by its own machinery, usually bound tightly to real content, but capable now and then of arriving alone. These small failures let you feel that binding come undone, and glimpse the feeling of knowing as the distinct fallible thing it is. In the early days of trying to explain this feeling, one of the most famous minds in the history of psychology offered an interpretation rooted not in the brain, but in hidden desire. It is an idea worth knowing and worth seeing past. Picture the consulting rooms of early psychoanalysis, where the strange and the everyday alike were read as coded messages from a hidden part of the self. Déjà vu among them. Sigmund Freud proposed that déjà vu might arise from the stirring of unconscious wishes or repressed memories, the surfacing of something buried in the mind that lent the present moment its false familiarity. In his framework, the feeling was not a quirk of memory machinery, but a quiet signal from the depths of the psyche, a hidden fantasy brushing against awareness. It was a characteristic interpretation for its time, reaching toward inner conflict and concealed desire to explain a strange experience. Later research, grounded in neuroscience and cognitive psychology, gently set this account aside, finding the roots of déjà vu in memory and familiarity systems, rather than in repressed wishes. This, too, is part of the honest history of the subject. Freud's idea was influential, thoughtful, and ultimately not supported by what later evidence revealed. It belongs to the long line of explanations the feeling has drawn to itself, each shaped by the understanding of its era. We have moved from past lives to buried wishes, to misfiring temporal lobes and familiarity signals. Each step trading a grander story for a more grounded one. The mystery shrinks a little with each revision, not into nothing but into something truer and stranger in its ordinariness than any of the older tales supposed. Among the more imaginative attempts to explain this feeling, one stands out for its sheer reach, an idea borrowed from optics, suggesting that each fragment of memory might contain the whole. Picture a hologram, that strange kind of image in which any small piece broken off still carries a faint version of the entire picture rather than just a corner of it. The psychiatrist Herman Snow proposed that human memories might be stored in a manner loosely analogous to a hologram, in which each fragment contains information about the whole. In this view, déjà vu could occur when some detail of a present scene matches a fragment stored from the past closely enough to evoke the whole stored memory, producing a powerful sense of familiarity even when the current scene is genuinely new. A small matching piece could light up an entire false sense of having been here before. It is a creative proposal and an honest one to mention, though it remains one idea among several rather than a settled account. Like other theories, it tries to explain why a partial resemblance can summon so complete a feeling of recognition. Whether or not the specific image holds, it points at a real puzzle the science keeps circling. How does a faint partial match a layout, half-glimpsed a fragment of a scene, produce a feeling so total, so convincing, so whole? Memory clearly does something more than store and retrieve exact copies. It reconstructs, fills, incompletes from fragments. Déjà vu may be one of the places where that constant hidden completing shows itself, where a small true echo blooms mistakenly into the full conviction of return. We have established that the sense of foreknowledge is empty, but knowing that does nothing to weaken how it feels in the moment, and the feeling can be powerful enough to move you. Picture someone mid-conversation gripped by the certainty that they know the next words about to be spoken, actually tensing, leaning in, bracing for a future they are sure they have already seen. So convincing is the illusion of prediction that people sometimes physically prepare for what they feel certain is coming next. They brace, they anticipate, they hold their breath for the moment they are sure they have already lived. The body responds to the feeling as though the foreknowledge were real, even when a moment later nothing predicted comes to pass. This is a quiet measure of how powerful the experience is. It is not a faint or abstract sensation that the mind easily dismisses. It carries enough conviction to shape behavior for a few seconds, to make a person act on a certainty that has no basis at all. And there is something instructive in that gap between feeling and fact. The strength of a conviction tells you nothing about its truth. Here is a feeling that can be total bodily compelling enough to make you brace yourself and entirely hollow underneath. We move through life trusting our sense of certainty, leaning on it constantly. Déjà vu is one of the rare moments that trust is exposed. When you can feel with your whole body how sure you can be and how wrong in the very same instant. Here is the single feature that separates the ordinary harmless feeling from its troubling forms, and it is worth holding on to carefully. Everything turns on one piece of knowing. Imagine the feeling striking the wave of false familiarity, rising and alongside it unfailingly, a clear inner voice that says, "This cannot actually be true, I have not been here before." In healthy déjà vu, the feeling always comes paired with the knowledge that it is false. You feel the familiarity, and at the same time you know with full clarity that it cannot be real. This intact awareness, this preserved sense of what is actually true, is the defining mark of normal déjà vu. The contradiction is felt, but reality is never lost. This is the whole key to understanding the experience. The familiarity is the illusion. The knowing that it is an illusion is the health. As long as both are present, déjà vu remains a curiosity brief and harmless, a feeling you can notice and set aside. It is precisely when that second piece, the knowing, falls away, that the experience changes character entirely, which is where we turn next. But hold this for now. The thing that keeps ordinary déjà vu safe is not the absence of the false feeling. The false feeling comes to nearly everyone. It is the presence alongside it of a clear and faithful sense of what is real. Your mind producing an illusion and recognizing it as one in the very same breath, never once mistaking the feeling for the truth. Take away that one piece of preserved knowing, and the feeling we have been treating as a harmless curiosity becomes something else entirely. The same sensation crosses a line. Picture a person who feels the familiarity and crucially believes it, who becomes convinced that they truly have lived this moment before, with no inner voice left to say otherwise. This is the difference between healthy déjà vu and its pathological forms. In conditions sometimes called déjà vécu, a sense of having already lived through events, the feeling arrives without the saving awareness that it is false. The person does not merely feel that the present is familiar, they believe it and may construct explanations for how they could already know what is happening. The illusion is no longer recognized as an illusion. When that recognition fails, what was a fleeting curiosity becomes a genuine disorder capable of disrupting a life. People may stop engaging with the world, convinced nothing is new, or grow distressed by a reality that seems endlessly repeated. The feeling itself has not changed. What has changed is the loss of the mind's check against it. This is why that single preserved piece of knowing matters so much. It is the thin, vital line between a moment of harmless wonder and a true affliction. The same neural event, the same false familiarity sits on both sides of that line. What separates them is whether the mind retains its quiet power to say this feels real and I know that it is not. A power most of us carry without ever noticing we have it. Look closely at one particular structure deep in the brain, because its specialty explains the strangest quality of this whole experience, the feeling of recognition with nothing attached to it. Imagine a part of the mind whose entire job is to register that something is familiar, without storing what it is, where you saw it, or when only the bare sense of having met it before. Within the medial temporal lobe sits a region, the perihinal cortex, closely tied to the sense of familiarity, distinct from the recall of specific details. This area is involved in producing the feeling that something has been encountered before, separate from the systems that retrieve the actual content of a memory, the context, the source, the surrounding facts. It deals in raw familiarity, recognition stripped bare. This separation is quietly illuminating. It means the brain genuinely has a system devoted to the feeling of knowing working apart from the system that supplies what is known. Familiarity is not a byproduct of recall. It is its own signal generated by its own tissue. And that is exactly what makes déjà vu possible. If raw familiarity can fire on its own from its own dedicated region, without the detail systems supplying any matching memory, then you would feel precisely what déjà vu delivers: recognition, with nothing behind it, a sense of having been here with no here to point to. The feeling that seems to defy explanation turns out to reflect the way the brain is actually built, with knowing, and the feeling of knowing, kept in separate hands. We have met Dickens and Scott already, but the thread runs wider than any two names. A whole line of writers reached this feeling first, and their words have aged into something close to clinical precision. Picture a literature shelf and a research file side by side, and passages from old novels and poems that could almost slip unaltered into the modern scientific record. Across the literary tradition, writers returned again and again to the experience of déjà vu, describing it with a faithfulness that researchers still notice. Poets and novelists captured the doubled quality, the eerie familiarity, the false sense of foreknowledge, the impression of a moment somehow lived before long, before any science existed, to test these descriptions. Their accounts now read, at times almost like careful observations, like notes taken by people whose entire craft was attending closely to inner experience and finding exact words for it. This is no accident. Before instruments and experiments, the most precise study of inner life was conducted by those who wrote about it, who watched their own minds and others with unusual care, and rendered what they found in language. They could not explain the feeling, but they could describe it truly. There is a lesson in this about where knowledge comes from. Not all of it arrives through measurement. Some of the most accurate accounts of what it is to be human were set down by writers working with nothing but attention and language generations before science could confirm them. When the researchers finally arrived, they found the territory already mapped in lines of prose and verse, by people who had simply looked closely and told the truth. Consider where this feeling actually tends to find you, because it is not where the old stories would suggest. It comes not in the grand moments, but in the forgettable ones. Picture it, arriving not at some momentous turning point in your life, but in a quiet hallway, a corner shop, a stretch of ordinary road somewhere utterly unremarkable. Déjà vu tends to occur in mundane, everyday settings, rather than in dramatic or emotionally charged ones. It does not save itself for the great occasions. It arrives in the middle of the ordinary, in plain rooms and routine moments, which is part of what makes it so curious. There is rarely anything about the setting that would seem to invite a sense of profound recognition. This pattern argues quietly against the old supernatural readings. If déjà vu were a message, a sign, a brush with fate, you might expect it to mark the significant moments. Instead, it gathers in the forgettable ones, the very moments least likely to carry any larger meaning. That ordinariness points back toward the simpler explanations. The feeling is not selecting meaningful moments. It is a quirk of memory machinery that can fire at any time, and since most of life is unremarkable, that is where it most often appears. There is something almost humbling in this. The eeriest sensation the mind produces tends to visit us not on the mountaintops of our lives, but in their plainest corridors, reminding us that the strange is not reserved for the dramatic, but threaded quietly through the most ordinary hours we have. Put a number to how often this actually happens, and the rarity is striking. For all that the feeling is famous, it visits most of us only a few times a year. Picture a whole year of days, thousands of waking hours, countless rooms entered, and conversations had, and within all of that, only a small scattering of moments touched by this particular strangeness. For most people who experience déjà vu, it happens only a handful of times per year, a few brief episodes scattered across an entire year of living. It is common in the sense that most people have felt it at some point, yet rare in the sense that for any individual, It arrives only occasionally, a fleeting visitor, rather than a regular companion. This rarity is itself part of the puzzle, and it reframes the question in an interesting way. We tend to ask why déjà vu happens at all, but given how constantly the brain is judging the familiar against the new thousands of times a day, every waking hour, the deeper question may be why it happens so seldom. Seen that way, déjà vu is not a sign of a faulty memory but of a remarkably reliable one. Out of all those countless judgments, the system gets it right almost every single time. The few moments a year, when it slips, are the rare exceptions that prove how steady the rule is. What should astonish us is not the occasional false note, but the vast silent accuracy surrounding it. The millions of correct judgments we never feel because they never fail. There is a question people often assume has an answer here, about whether this feeling favors one kind of person over another. On at least one common dividing line, it does not. It falls evenly. Picture researchers sorting through survey after survey, looking for some difference between how often women and men report the experience, and finding the two columns stubbornly, reassuringly level. Studies have generally found no reliable difference between women and men in how often they report déjà vu. The experience appears to be distributed fairly evenly across this line, not favoring one over the other in any consistent way. Where differences do shape who reports it more, they tend to involve age, which falls with the years and certain habits of mind and circumstance, rather than this particular division. This evenness fits the larger picture of déjà vu as something deeply rooted in the common architecture of the human brain. It is not a quirk tied to one group, not a product of particular social roles or experiences that differ sharply between people. It rises from memory machinery that everyone carries in much the same form. There is something quietly unifying in that. The feeling does not sort us. It does not belong more to one kind of person than another. It is woven into the shared equipment of being human, arriving on much the same terms for nearly everyone who has a mind capable of memory and self-awareness. In a world full of differences, déjà vu is one of the small, strange experiences that reaches across them, touching people alike, regardless of who they are. While déjà vu touches nearly everyone, there are hints that a tendency toward it may, in some families, run deeper than chance. The feeling may have a faint thread of inheritance. Picture members of a single family across generations, each quietly prone to this experience, more than most, sharing not just features and habits, but a susceptibility to the same strange flicker. There have been documented cases and reports suggesting that a heightened tendency toward déjà vu can appear within families, hinting that some component of how prone a person is to the experience may have a hereditary element. While déjà vu is common across the whole population, the frequency and intensity with which individuals experience it varies, and some of that variation may be shaped by inherited differences in how the brain's memory and familiarity systems work. This remains an area where evidence is limited, and researchers are cautious, drawing no sweeping conclusions. But the hints are intriguing. They suggest that the machinery underlying the feeling, like so much about the brain, may vary from person to person in ways partly written into us before birth. It adds a quiet dimension to the experience. The flicker that visits you may in some small way be shaped by the same inheritance that gave you your eyes or your temperament, a faint family resemblance not in how you look, but in how your memory occasionally stumbles. The most private and fleeting of sensations may carry hidden within it a trace of the people you came from, a shared way of meeting the world that runs deeper than anything you could see. We touched on this idea a moment ago, but it deserves to be met fully because it turns the whole question inside out. The mystery may not be the feeling at all, but its scarcity. Picture the brain across a single ordinary day, making its quiet judgment about every passing moment. Is this old or new, thousands upon thousands of times, almost never faltering? Some researchers argue that the truly remarkable thing about déjà vu is not that it occurs, but that it occurs so seldom, given how relentlessly the brain must sort the familiar from the novel, judging the status of every incoming moment, every face, every room, every turn of a path. The wonder is that this vast machinery so rarely produces a false signal. A few brief slips a year, set against millions of correct judgments, is an extraordinary record of accuracy. This flips the usual framing in a way worth sitting with. We instinctively treat déjà vu as the thing that needs explaining, the anomaly, the error. But the error is vanishingly rare. What needs explaining in truth is the near-perfect reliability that surrounds it. Seen this way, déjà vu becomes a small tribute to the system, rather than an indictment of it. The occasional false familiarity is the price of a memory that works almost flawlessly, almost all the time beneath your notice. You never feel the countless correct judgments because they never go wrong. You feel only the rare exception. And that exception, far from revealing a broken mind, reveals a quietly astonishing one, getting it right so completely that the few times it slips can unsettle you for years. Stay with that hidden labor for a moment, because it runs constantly beneath everything you do, and you never feel it. Your mind is sorting time itself, ceaselessly in silence. Picture every single thing entering your awareness. Right now, these words, the surface before you, the sounds at the edge of the room, each one instantly tagged by your brain as familiar or new. At every waking moment, your brain is making continuous automatic judgments about whether what you are experiencing is something encountered before or something genuinely new. This sorting runs constantly beneath awareness, shaping your sense of reality without ever announcing itself. You move through a world that feels simply obviously familiar or unfamiliar, never sensing the immense, ceaseless work that produces that feeling. This is the silent foundation déjà vu briefly disturbs. The reason the experience is so startling when it comes is that it exposes for a second a process you normally never feel at all. The judgment of old versus new is supposed to stay invisible, delivering only its result. This is familiar, this is new, never showing the work. And here is the quiet marvel in it. Your sense that the world is familiar or strange, the most basic texture of your experience, is not given to you directly. It is computed moment by machinery you cannot feel and never thank. Most of the time it works so seamlessly that you mistake its output for reality itself. Déjà vu is one of the rare instances the seam shows. When you catch a glimpse of how much quiet judgment goes into something as simple as feeling that you have been here before. Follow that thought one step further to its natural resting place, because it offers perhaps the simplest way to understand the whole experience. Sometimes the silent process simply grows audible. Picture a machine that runs perfectly and noiselessly for years, and then for a single second emits a faint sound, not breaking, just briefly making itself heard. If your brain is constantly judging the familiar against the new silently and reliably, then déjà vu may be nothing more than the rare moment that quiet judgment becomes loud enough to feel. The familiarity signal fires a little too strongly, or fires without its usual matching content, and what is normally a seamless background process surfaces into awareness as a distinct, strange sensation. This may be the most grounded way to hold the whole experience. Not a haunting, not a message, not a glimpse of another life, but a moment when an ordinary, ceaseless mental process briefly steps out of the background and into the foreground of your attention. There is something quietly beautiful in that framing. The eeriest feeling the mind produces may simply be the sound of its most dependable work becoming for an instant perceptible. You are not experiencing a breach in reality. You are experiencing your own mind caught in the act of doing something it does every second of every day, only this once doing it loudly enough that you finally notice. The mystery is not that the process exists, it is that for one strange moment it let you hear it running. There is a thread connecting this feeling to a particular cast of mind, a way of being in the world that seems to leave a person slightly more open to it. The imaginative feel it more. Picture someone richly imaginative, given to daydreams, and wonder, curious and open to new experience. And notice that such a person tends to meet this strange flicker a little more often than others. Research has found that people higher in traits like openness to experience and a vivid active imagination tend to report déjà vu somewhat more frequently. The same minds drawn to fantasy, to absorption in ideas and inner worlds, to curiosity about the new seem a little more prone to the experience. The connection is modest but real, appearing across studies. Why this should be so is not fully settled, but it fits the broader picture. A mind more active in generating and recombining mental imagery, more attentive to its own inner states, may be more likely to notice the faint flicker when it comes, or more prone to producing it in the first place. There is a gentle resonance in this. The feeling that has so long been bound up with mystery and wonder turns out to visit a little more often the very people most inclined toward wonder. Those open to the strange, the imaginative, the not yet explained, are the ones who feel this small everyday strangeness most. It is as though the experience finds its way most readily to minds already leaning toward the kind of openness that would welcome it, and pause over it, and want to understand. For all the progress researchers have made, an honest account has to admit how stubborn this feeling remains under study. It still slips away the moment science reaches for it. Picture a researcher who has set up everything, the conditions, the instruments, the careful design, waiting for the genuine, spontaneous feeling to appear, and finding that it refuses to come on cue. Despite real advances, déjà vu remains notoriously difficult to study directly in the laboratory. The spontaneous, full experience cannot be summoned reliably on demand, and the versions researchers can induce through word lists or virtual environments capture pieces of the feeling, rather than its complete eerie wholeness. The genuine article tends to dissolve the moment anyone tries to hold it still for examination. This is worth naming plainly, because it keeps the science honest. For all that has been learned about the brain regions involved, the role of familiarity, the patterns of who feels it, and when the heart of the experience still resists full capture, researchers work around the edges, inferring the center from what they can reach. There is a fitting quality to this stubbornness. A feeling that plays with our sense of time and reality refuses appropriately to sit still for the instruments. It arrives unbidden, in ordinary moments, and is gone before it can be measured. The science has made real headway, and it remains genuinely incomplete, and the people who study it have grown willing to say both at once. Some part of the mystery has yielded. Some part of it still slips through the fingers, exactly as the feeling itself always has. There is a particular flavor of this feeling, tied tightly to places, and it can turn the act of arriving somewhere new into something that aches, like return. A first visit can feel like coming home. Picture stepping for the very first time into a town, a building, a landscape you have never seen, and being met, not just by familiarity, but by a strange, quiet sense of belonging, as if you were coming back. Some experiences of déjà vu are strongly bound to place, producing not only a sense that a location is familiar, but something deeper, an impression of return, even of homecoming in a setting you know you have never visited. The feeling attaches to the environment itself, lending a genuinely new place, the emotional weight of somewhere long known. This place-bound quality fits what we have seen about how déjà vu fastens onto spatial layouts and the overall configuration of a scene. When a new place echoes the deep structure of one met before and forgotten, the resulting familiarity can carry not just recognition, but the warmth that familiar places hold. There is something quietly moving in this particular form. To arrive somewhere for the first time and feel that you have come home is to experience in a single strange moment the deep bond between memory and place that usually takes years to build. The feeling is false in the literal sense. You have not been here before. and yet the sense of belonging it lends can be real and tender. A reminder of how much of home lives, not in any particular place, but in the feeling of return itself, which the mind can summon, even somewhere it has never stood. We turn now from the mechanics of this feeling toward what it quietly tells us about ourselves, and the first thing it reveals is how vast and invisible our remembering truly is. Picture all the recognizing you do in a single hour, the faces you place without effort, the rooms you know at a glance, the countless small judgments of the familiar that never once rise into thought. Déjà vu, in its strange way, throws a light on the immense amount of remembering that happens entirely outside awareness. Most of memory's work is silent. You recognize place and orient yourself continuously, and almost none of it reaches consciousness. You simply find the world already sorted into the known and the new without ever feeling the sorting happen. The feeling becomes meaningful precisely because it is an exception. It is one of the rare moments the hidden work surfaces, when a familiarity arrives loudly enough, or strangely enough, to be felt rather than merely used. In that instant you glimpse the existence of a process that is always running and almost never noticed. There is a humbling perspective in this. You think of yourself as remembering when you deliberately call something to mind, a name, a date, a face. But that conscious remembering is a thin sliver of the whole. Beneath it runs an ocean of recognition you never feel, holding your sense of the world steady moment by moment. Déjà vu is a ripple on that ocean's surface, a brief sign of the depths below, reminding you how much of your own mind does its essential work entirely without you. Consider how completely we take this system for granted, so completely that we only notice it the rare moment it falters. The stumble is what reveals the machine. Picture walking down a flight of stairs, you know well your feet, finding each step without thought, until one tread is a fraction higher than expected, and you catch yourself suddenly aware of the walking you never think about. Déjà vu is at its core a small stumble in a memory system so reliable that we forget it is running at all. We never notice the system precisely, because it works so well, delivering its judgments of familiar and new so smoothly that they feel like simple features of the world rather than the output of constant mental labor. Only when it slips briefly and harmlessly do we sense it was there. This is why the feeling is at once so ordinary and so strange. Ordinary because it is just a minor hiccup in everyday machinery. Strange because that machinery is normally so invisible that any glimpse of it feels uncanny. There is a quiet wisdom in seeing it this way. The things we depend on most completely are often the ones we notice least, becoming visible only when they falter. Your memory's constant sorting of time is among the most dependable processes you possess, and among the most ignored. Déjà vu is the small catch on the stair, the moment the seamless becomes briefly felt. It unsettles us, not because something has gone deeply wrong, but because something we trusted so completely has for a single second let us see that it was working all along. Turn inward for a moment now toward your own experience of this feeling and notice something curious about what it leaves behind, which is to say, almost nothing. Think back to the last time déjà vu touched you. You can likely recall that it happened perhaps even where you were, but try to retrieve the content of it and you find nothing there to hold. This is one of the feeling's quiet peculiarities. Déjà vu leaves behind no actual memory, no scene, no detail, only the faint recollection that a feeling of familiarity once passed through you. The experience that insists so powerfully that you are remembering something turns out to be a remembering with no remembered thing inside it. When it fades, there is nothing left to recall but the strangeness itself. This is deeply telling about what the experience actually is. If déjà vu were a real memory surfacing, you would be left with some content, some image or fact you could return to. Instead, you are left empty-handed, which fits the idea that the feeling is familiarity without substance, a signal of knowing, detached from anything known. There is something almost poignant in this emptiness. The most vivid sense of having lived a moment before passes through you and vanishes, taking nothing with it, leaving only the memory that it happened. It promises remembrance and delivers none. And in that gap lies its whole nature, a feeling of the past that has no past behind it, gone as completely as it came, real only in the instant it was felt. Here is a way of understanding this feeling that casts it not as a flaw but as a virtue, even a kind of integrity. It may be your mind keeping itself honest. Picture an internal auditor who never rests quietly, testing each sense of familiarity against the evidence, asking of every moment, is this really known to me, or does it only feel that way? Déjà vu may be living evidence that your mind is constantly checking its own claims about the past, monitoring whether its feelings of familiarity are warranted. When the experience comes paired, as it healthily is, with the clear knowledge that the familiarity is false, what you are witnessing is that monitoring at work, catching a signal that does not match reality, and flagging it as untrue. This reframes the feeling from a glitch into a kind of fidelity. The eeriness is the sensation of your mind refusing to be fooled, declining to accept a familiarity it cannot justify. Far from a failure of memory, it may be a sign of memory's honesty, its built-in resistance to false belief about the past. There is genuine reassurance in holding it this way. We might fear that déjà vu reveals a mind prone to error, easily deceived about its own history. The opposite seems closer to the truth. It reveals a mind so committed to accuracy that it constantly tests itself, and that lets you feel now and then the moment it catches a small lie and sets it aside. The strange feeling is your own mind keeping faith with reality, quietly and continuously, even about something as private as whether you have stood in this room before. Look more closely at the particular strangeness of this feeling, because its source is subtler than it first appears. The unease is not about the past at all. It is about the present. Picture the precise texture of the sensation, not a memory rising up, but the current moment itself, taking on a strange second-hand quality as if it were not quite freshly yours. The eeriness of déjà vu does not come from some piece of the past forcing its way into the present. It comes from the present moment itself, feeling borrowed, used, somehow not new, as though the instant you are living were a copy of an original you cannot place. The strangeness lives in the now, not in any remembered then. This is a subtle but important shift in how to understand the feeling. We tend to imagine it as the past intruding on the present. But there is no actual past content involved, no memory surfacing. What happens is that the present is wrongly stamped with the quality that normally belongs only to the remembered, the quality of having been encountered before. And that may be the deepest root of the unease. We expect the present to feel fresh, immediate ours, for the first time. When it arrives, instead wearing the worn texture of memory, something fundamental seems out of place, not because a ghost has appeared, but because the basic newness of the moment has quietly failed. The feeling unsettles us because it touches something we never question. The simple assumption that this moment, whatever else it holds, at least belongs to us now and has never been lived before. There are two mental acts we keep so cleanly separate that we never even notice they are separate, and this feeling briefly smears the line between them. Recognizing and remembering come apart. Picture the easy difference between knowing a face is familiar and actually recalling who the person is. Two things that normally arrive together so smoothly, you never sense the join. For a few seconds, déjà vu blurs the line between recognizing and remembering. Normally these work in concert. You recognize something as familiar, and the memory of where and when and how follows, naturally binding the familiarity to its source. In déjà vu, the recognition fires, while the remembering supplies nothing, and you are left feeling that you know a moment you cannot possibly recall. This brief separation reveals that the two are genuinely distinct mental acts, usually so tightly linked that we experience them as one. Recognizing is the sense that something is familiar. Remembering is the retrieval of the actual past that justifies it. Most of the time they arrive together seamlessly, and we never notice they are two things. There is something quietly profound in feeling them come apart. It shows that the foundation of memory is more layered than it seems, built from separate processes that usually move in perfect step. Déjà vu is one of the rare moments that step falters, letting you feel recognition standing alone, stripped of the remembering that normally accompanies it. For a few seconds, you experience the architecture of your own memory, not as a single smooth act, but as the assembly of distinct parts it has been all along, briefly caught working out of order. We noted earlier that this feeling thins out as we grow older. Sitting with that fact a little longer reveals something almost heartening hidden inside it. The feeling may belong to vigor, not decline. Picture a young mind, moving quickly through the world, taking in faces and rooms at speed, its memory systems firing rapidly, and occasionally, in that very quickness, tripping into a moment of false familiarity. The decline of déjà vu with age may mean that the experience is in part a sign of a memory system working quickly and vigorously. If the feeling arises from fast active memory processes occasionally slipping out of step, then its frequency in youth and its fading over the years would reflect the natural changes in how briskly that machinery runs. The young feel it more because their memory moves faster, and faster systems paradoxically produce more of these particular small errors. This casts the feeling in an unexpected light. We might assume that an odd memory experience signals something amiss. Here, the opposite reading is plausible. The presence of déjà vu may be a quiet marker of a memory in its quick and lively prime. There is a gentle irony in that. The strange flicker that can unsettle a young person may be in its way a sign of mental vitality, of a memory still moving fast enough to occasionally stumble. As the years pass and the experience grows rarer, it is not that memory has improved, but that it has slowed, settling into a steadier pace, less prone to this particular slip. The eerie feeling and the quick mind go together, and to feel it often is perhaps a small sign of how vigorously your remembering still runs. Step back and take in the whole arc of how humanity has understood this feeling, because the journey itself tells a story. We have traveled from the supernatural all the way to the ordinary. Picture the long procession of explanations across the centuries, past lives, divine messages, buried desires, slowly giving way to temporal lobes, familiarity signals, and the quiet machinery of memory. The same feeling that for most of history seemed mystical, a sign of reincarnation or prophecy or fate, now appears to be ordinary mental machinery briefly making itself felt. The arc of understanding has moved steadily from the cosmic toward the biological, from messages beyond the world to processes within the skull. What once demanded supernatural explanation now yields increasingly to natural one. This shift mirrors a larger pattern in how human knowledge grows. Again and again, experiences once attributed to forces beyond us have been traced over time to the workings of the natural world and the brain that perceives it. Déjà vu is one small chapter in that long story. And yet something interesting happens at the end of this journey. The feeling does not become less wondrous as it becomes more explicable. To learn that déjà vu is your memory machinery briefly surfacing is not to drain the mystery, but to relocate it into the astonishing fact that you carry inside your head a system constantly sorting time, a system so intricate that its rare stumbles can feel like brushes with eternity. The mystical reading gave way, but the wonder did not. It simply found a new home, closer than anyone once imagined, in the ordinary, extraordinary workings of an ordinary human mind. Let us be plain about one thing this feeling does not do, and then notice what that very limitation reveals. It will not show you the future, and the fact that it feels like it might is the real lesson. Picture the certainty that washes over you in the moment, the sense that you know exactly what is about to unfold, and then the quiet truth that this knowing has never once under testing proven real. You will almost certainly never glimpse the future through déjà vu. The sense of foreknowledge it carries, however vivid, does not translate into any actual ability to predict what comes next. Tested carefully, the conviction proves empty every time. What is telling, though, is not the absence of real prediction but the overwhelming presence of the feeling that prediction is happening. That gap is the heart of the matter, and the most instructive thing the experience offers. It is a clean, lived demonstration that the strength of a conviction has no necessary connection to its truth. You can feel completely that you know what is coming, and be entirely wrong. There is a quiet wisdom to carry away from this. We move through our lives trusting our certainties, leaning on the feeling of knowing as if it were knowledge itself. Déjà vu gently exposes the difference. It hands you a certainty you can feel in your body, and shows you a moment later that it pointed to nothing. To have felt that, even once, is to hold a small but lasting humility about all our certainties, an awareness that the sense of being sure and the fact of being right are two different things and do not always travel together. Draw out the deeper lesson hidden in that gap, because it reaches beyond this one strange feeling into how we know anything at all. Familiarity, it turns out, is not the same as truth. Picture how easily the things we encounter often come to feel true simply because they feel familiar. The worn idea, the repeated claim, the face we have seen many times, all carrying a warmth we mistake for trust. Déjà vu quietly reminds us that familiarity and truth are separate things inside the mind. The feeling that something is familiar is a signal generated by the brain, and like any signal, it can fire when it should not. In déjà vu, familiarity arrives attached to a moment that is genuinely new, proving that the sense of the familiar can be entirely disconnected from whether anything was truly encountered before. This carries a lesson well beyond the experience itself. We are deeply inclined to trust the familiar, to feel that what we have met before is safer, truer, more real. Familiarity quietly shades into a sense of truth, and déjà vu shows in a single clean instant that the two can come fully apart. There is something worth keeping in this small revelation. The warmth of familiarity is not evidence. A thing can feel deeply known and be false, just as a new moment can feel wrongly like a return. To have felt that disconnection directly, even briefly, is to grow a little more careful about the quiet pull of the familiar in everything. More aware that the comfortable sense of having known something before is a feeling the mind produces, and not on its own a reliable guide to what is real. Return for a moment to how quickly this feeling passes, because that brevity which once made it so hard to study turns out to be a kind of gift. It is gone before it can take hold of you. Picture the feeling rising, the wave of strange familiarity beginning to crest, and then, before you have even finished registering it, before unease can fully settle, already receding and gone. The brevity of déjà vu is in a quiet way its mercy. The experience passes so quickly in a second or two that it ends almost before you can decide whether to be troubled by it. The same fleetingness that long frustrated researchers, making the feeling so hard to catch and study, is exactly what keeps it from becoming distressing for the rest of us. It does not linger long enough to take root. We have seen what happens when it does last, in the rare persistent forms where the feeling fills every moment, and nothing can seem new. The contrast makes the gift of brevity plain. For most of us, the experience is held in check by its own speed, gone before it can do more than briefly puzzle us. There is a kind of grace in this design, whether or not anything designed it. The strangest sensation the mind produces is also one of the briefest arriving and departing before it can unsettle us deeply. It gives us just enough to wonder at, and then withdraws, leaving us with the moment intact and ordinary once more. Its fleeting nature is not a limitation to overcome, but a quiet kindness built into the experience, a strangeness measured out in seconds, precisely so that it can touch us without ever truly disturbing the steady ground of our days. Here is one of the most important truths about memory itself, and this feeling lets us watch it happen. Memory is not a recording. It is a rebuilding, and déjà vu catches that rebuilding mid-motion. Picture memory not as a shelf of stored recordings waiting to be played back, but as an act of construction, assembled fresh each time from fragments filled in, completed, built anew, on every recall. Most of what we call memory is reconstruction rather than playback. The brain does not store experiences like recordings to be replayed intact. It keeps fragments and reassembles them each time into something that feels like a coherent memory, filling gaps and smoothing edges in the process. And déjà vu may be that constructive process caught in the act of building something false, assembling a feeling of pastness around a moment that has none. This connects the experience to the deepest nature of human memory. If remembering is always a kind of construction, then it is no surprise that it can occasionally construct a familiarity where none belongs, building the sense of a past that was never lived. There is something clarifying in seeing it this way. We tend to imagine memory as a faithful archive, and its errors as rare malfunctions. The truth is closer to the reverse. Memory is an active creative process, constantly building and rebuilding, and its general reliability is the achievement, not its default. Déjà vu is one of the rare moments we glimpse that construction working visibly, assembling a false sense of return before our awareness. It is not memory failing to play back a recording. It is memory doing what it always does, building and letting us just this once watch it build. Pause on a thought that reframes the whole experience as something almost reassuring. Given how constantly your mind could deceive you about the familiar, consider how seldom it actually does. Picture the sheer number of opportunities for error in a single day, every moment, offering a chance to feel falsely that you have been here before, and almost every one of them passing without any such slip. Consider how rarely your mind misleads you in this particular way, given how endlessly it could. Your brain makes countless judgments about familiarity every waking hour, and the overwhelming majority are correct. The false signal that produces déjà vu against that vast backdrop is extraordinarily rare, a handful of slips against millions of accurate calls. This is worth turning toward you directly. The next time the feeling unsettles you, it may help to remember that it is the exception so rare it stands out set against a lifetime of your mind. Getting this exact judgment right silently without fail nearly every single time. There is real comfort available here if you choose to take it. We tend to notice our mind's failures and overlook its steady successes, because the successes never announce themselves. Déjà vu is loud, precisely because it is rare. Behind that single strange moment stands an uncountable host of correct judgments you never felt, never questioned, never had cause to doubt. The feeling that seems to reveal a mind prone to error reveals more truly a mind of astonishing reliability, one that misleads you this way so seldom that the rare time it does can stay with you for years. There is a reason every description of this feeling differs from every other, and it lies in something deeply true about the experience. It is always entirely your own. Picture two people who have both felt déjà vu countless times, sitting down to compare it, and finding that even their words for the same strange sensation never quite line up. The feeling belongs to no one else's exact moment, which is part of why no two accounts of it ever fully match. Déjà vu always arrives within a particular person, in a particular instant, woven into the specific texture of their own ongoing experience. The familiarity attaches to your scene, your moment, your private flow of awareness, and so the feeling, however common in the abstract, is never quite the same from one person to the next. This is why a sensation shared by most of humanity resists a single shared description. Each instance is embedded in a life colored by the individual mind that holds it impossible to fully translate into anyone else's terms. There is something quietly moving in this, Déjà vu is at once universal and utterly private, felt by nearly everyone, yet by each in their own irreducible way. It is one of those experiences that binds us together and isolates us at the same time, a feeling we all know and none of us can perfectly convey. When you feel it, you join a vast company of others who have felt something like it, and you remain in that exact moment entirely alone, with it holding a strangeness that is yours and no one else's. However many have stood where you stand, locate exactly where this feeling lives, in the architecture of the mind, because it occupies a borderland we are normally blind to. It sits on the seam, where perceiving meets remembering. Picture the constant invisible handoff between what you are perceiving right now and what you have stored from before, two streams, meeting so smoothly that you never sense the join. Déjà vu sits on the seam between perception and memory, a join we almost never feel. In every moment, what you perceive is instantly checked against what you remember, the new measured against the known, so that the world arrives already sorted into the familiar and the fresh. This meeting of perception and memory happens seamlessly beneath all awareness, and we experience only its smooth result. Déjà vu is one of the rare moments that seem becomes briefly visible when the matching of present perception against stored memory misfires, and we feel for an instant the boundary we normally cannot detect. The new is wrongly tagged as known, and the join between perceiving and remembering usually invisible surfaces into experience. There is something quietly revealing in glimpsing that seam. We experience the world as immediate and whole, never sensing how much of it is assembled from the marriage of fresh perception and old memory happening continuously inside us. Déjà vu pulls back the curtain for a second, showing that what feels like direct contact with reality is in fact a constant collaboration between what we see now and what we have known before. The feeling unsettles us because it lets us feel a seam we were never meant to notice, the hidden join on which our entire sense of the present quietly rests. Here is a curious and humbling fact about this feeling, one you can test for yourself. Understanding exactly what it is offers no protection at all against how strange it feels when it comes. Picture someone who has studied déjà vu for years, who could explain every theory of its origin, caught off guard by it on an ordinary afternoon, and unsettled all the same. Even complete intellectual understanding of déjà vu does nothing to soften the strangeness of it in the moment. You may know precisely that it arises from familiarity, machinery briefly misfiring, that it carries no real foreknowledge that the moment is genuinely new. None of that knowledge reaches the feeling. When it comes, it is just as eerie, just as disorienting, as it would be to someone who had never heard a word of explanation. This reveals something about how the mind is layered. The feeling operates at a level beneath conscious knowledge, and your understanding sits above it, unable to reach down and quiet it. Knowing why a thing feels strange does not stop it from feeling strange. There is something almost reassuring in this stubbornness. It means the experience cannot be explained away, cannot be dissolved by understanding, cannot be reduced to a fact that robs it of its character. You can know everything about it and still feel its full force. The strangeness is not a product of ignorance to be cured by learning. It is built into the experience itself, durable and immediate, a small permanent piece of wonder that survives all the explaining we can do. To understand déjà vu completely, and still be unsettled by it, is to be reminded that knowledge and feeling live in different rooms, and the door between them does not always open. We have seen the troubling forms this feeling can take when its safeguard fails. Looking at them once more reveals something we never appreciate about ourselves. In health, we lean constantly on simply trusting that the new is new. Picture how completely you rely, without thinking, on your sense that a fresh moment is fresh, that you have not lived it before, a trust so basic you have never once questioned it. The disorder version of déjà vu, in which the feeling arrives without the saving knowledge that it is false, shows how deeply we depend on simply trusting our sense of the new. In health, you take for granted that what feels new is new, that your sense of novelty can be relied upon. When that trust breaks, as in persistent déjà vu, the result is profoundly disorienting. A world where nothing can feel genuinely fresh, where every moment seems already lived. This reveals a foundation we never notice because it almost never fails. Your ability to feel that a moment is new and to trust that feeling underlies your entire relationship with time and experience. It is so reliable that you have never had to think about it. There is a quiet gratitude available in seeing this. The people for whom this trust has broken show us what it silently provides for the rest of us, the simple, precious capacity to meet each moment as new, to feel the freshness of an unlived instant. We pass our whole lives leaning on that capacity, without once acknowledging it. To glimpse its absence is to recognize, perhaps for the first time, what a gift it is to feel that this moment right now has never been lived before, and to trust that feeling completely. Carry forward the deepest practical lesson this feeling offers, the one that reaches furthest beyond itself. Each episode is a small, vivid reminder that how sure we feel and how right we are can fully separate. Picture the total confidence déjà vu delivers, the absolute certainty of having been here before, sitting directly alongside the plain fact that you have not, the two coexisting in a single moment. Each episode of Déjà Vu is a quiet reminder that confidence and accuracy can come apart inside us. The feeling hands you a certainty that is complete and a claim that is false in the same instant, with no contradiction that your feelings can detect. You are utterly sure and utterly wrong, and the sureness gives no hint of the wrongness. This is among the most valuable things the experience can teach, and it reaches far past déjà vu itself. We navigate our lives largely by our sense of confidence, treating the strength of a conviction as a rough guide to its truth. Déjà vu shows cleanly and personally that the two can be completely independent. There is a lasting humility to draw from this, if we let it settle. The feeling of certainty is just that, a feeling generated by the mind, and it can attach itself to what is false as easily as to what is true. To have felt total conviction about something you knew to be wrong, even in this small, harmless way, is to hold a quiet awareness about all your certainties. It does not teach you to trust nothing. It teaches you that the sense of being sure is not by itself evidence, and that the most confident feeling in the world can still sometimes point to nothing at all. Turn toward your own life again for a moment, toward the conditions under which this feeling tends to find you. Have you noticed that it often comes when you are worn thin, as though some inner watchfulness had momentarily slipped? Picture the end of a long day, your reserves low, your attention frayed and loose, and the feeling arriving in just such a moment when your mind is least sharp and most tired. Déjà vu tends to occur more often when people are fatigued or stressed, as though weariness loosened the ordinarily tight coordination between memory and perception. When you are tired, the mental processes that normally keep the familiar and the new cleanly sorted seem to grow a little less precise, a little more prone to the slip that produces the feeling. It is as if the editor that usually catches such errors had stepped briefly away from the desk. Notice this in yourself if you can. The next time the feeling comes, there is a fair chance you will find you are tired, stretched, running low rather than rested and sharp. There is something quietly grounding in this connection. The experience that can seem so suggestive of the uncanny tends to visit not in moments of heightened awareness, but in moments of depletion, when the mind is simply worn. It is less a sign that some veil has thinned than that you yourself have thinned, that your reserves are low, and your inner watchfulness briefly dimmed. Seen this way, déjà vu becomes almost a small signal from the body. A quiet message that you are tired, that the careful machinery of your mind is running on less than it needs, and that perhaps it is time to rest. Consider what this feeling does not do, because its very emptiness may be the truest thing about it. It makes no demand, offers no message, and that silence may be its whole nature. Picture the feeling arriving and departing, leaving behind no instruction, no meaning, no task, no revelation, only the bare fact that it happened and then was gone. Déjà vu asks nothing of you and explains nothing. Unlike so much of mental life, it carries no content to act upon, no message to decode, no information to use. It simply arrives, delivers its strange familiarity, and withdraws, leaving you exactly where you were, with nothing required and nothing revealed. For all its uncanny force, it is curiously empty of any demand or meaning. This restraint may be its entire character, and a large part of why it has fascinated people for so long. We are accustomed to our feelings meaning something, pointing somewhere, asking for a response. Déjà vu refuse all of that. It points nowhere, asks for nothing, means nothing in itself. There is something almost graceful in that emptiness. The feeling does not burden you. It does not demand that you understand it, or act on it, or carry it forward. It comes as a brief, strange visitor that wants nothing, gives nothing but itself, and leaves no trace. Perhaps that is why, despite its eeriness, it sits so lightly in memory, neither troubling nor instructing, only briefly reminding us that the mind can produce experiences purely for their own strange sake, asking nothing in return, meaning nothing beyond the bare fact of having been felt. Here is a way of valuing this feeling that sets aside its strangeness entirely and finds something almost precious in it. It is one of the rare times we feel our memory at work, rather than merely using its results. Picture how you normally relate to your memory, drawing on it, constantly leaning on its outputs, yet never once feeling the machinery itself turn beneath you. Déjà vu is one of the few moments we actually feel our memory working, rather than simply using what it produces. Almost always memory delivers only its results, the recognition, the recalled fact, the sense of the familiar, while the work that generates these stays entirely hidden. You use your memory ceaselessly and feel its operation almost never. Déjà vu is a rare exception. A moment when the process itself rises into awareness and you sense directly the machinery turning. This makes the experience, for all its strangeness, a kind of rare access. It is a glimpse behind a curtain that is almost always drawn, a brief chance to feel something that normally runs entirely out of sight. There is a quiet privilege in that if we choose to see it so. We carry within us an extraordinary apparatus, sorting time and familiarity every waking second, and we are almost wholly unaware of it, knowing it only through its smooth results. Déjà vu lets us feel it directly, even if only through a momentary error. It is as if the mind, just for a second, lets you place your hand on the engine and feel it running, an engine you depend on entirely, and otherwise never sense at all. The strangeness is real, but so is the rare intimacy with your own working mind that the feeling briefly grants. Take stock of where the science actually stands now, because the nature of the mystery has shifted over the years. The question is no longer whether the feeling is real or what realm it comes from, but precisely how the brain produces it. Picture the old debates, whether déjà vu signaled past lives, or divine messages giving way to a newer, narrower, more grounded question, asked in laboratories and clinics. The mystery that remains around déjà vu is not whether it is real or whether it comes from beyond the mind, but exactly how the brain produces it. Researchers now broadly agree that the feeling arises from the brain's memory and familiarity systems, and the open questions have grown more specific and more technical. Which structures fire in what sequence? Why the familiarity signal sometimes detaches from its content? How the monitoring system catches it? The puzzle has moved from the cosmic to the mechanical. This is how a mystery matures. It does not always vanish. Often it sharpens, narrowing from a vast, unanswerable question into a set of precise, answerable ones, still unsolved, but no longer boundless. There is something satisfying in tracing that progression. The question that once spanned heaven and earth, asking whether déjà vu proved another life or another world, has contracted to a careful inquiry into the timing and architecture of memory. The wonder has not disappeared, but it has changed shape, becoming the focused wonder of researchers, working out the fine details of a process they now know lives entirely within the brain. The mystery that remains is smaller, sharper, and closer to home. No longer whether the feeling is a message, but simply how exactly the mind stages so convincing an illusion of return. Let us be honest about the limits of what we know, because that honesty is itself part of the story. Researchers still cannot fully explain this feeling, and increasingly they are willing to say so without apology. Picture a scientist asked to give the final complete account of déjà vu, and choosing instead to describe what is known, what is suspected, and what remains genuinely open. Despite real progress, researchers still cannot fully explain déjà vu, and they have grown more comfortable acknowledging this openly. Much has been learned about the brain regions involved, the role of familiarity, the patterns of who experiences it and when, but the complete mechanism, the full account of how the feeling is produced in all its detail, remains unsettled. Several explanations hold partial support, and none has closed the question entirely. There is something admirable in this candor, and it marks a kind of maturity in the field. Rather than overclaiming, rather than forcing a tidy answer, those who study the feeling increasingly name the uncertainty for what it is holding, what is known and what is not known side by side. This honesty is worth respecting and even drawing comfort from. It would be easy to dress the partial understanding in the language of certainty, to declare the mystery solved. Instead, the researchers most familiar with déjà vu tend to be the most willing to say that pieces of it still elude them. That openness is not a weakness in the science, but a strength, a sign of a field confident enough to admit what it does not yet grasp. The feeling that has resisted easy explanation for centuries resists it still in part, and the people who know it best have made their peace with saying so plainly. Notice how the human response to this feeling has changed across time, because that change reflects something larger about us. What once stirred fear now mostly stirs curiosity. Picture someone centuries ago, gripped by the feeling and reading it as an omen or a brush, with the supernatural set beside someone today who meets the same sensation with interest and a wish to understand. The way people respond to déjà vu has shifted over the generations. What once frightened or awed, taken as a sign of fate or a glimpse of another life, now mostly fascinates, met with curiosity rather than fear. As the feeling has come to be understood as a natural product of the mind, the dread that once surrounded it has largely given way to interest. This small shift mirrors a larger one in how human beings meet the unknown. Experiences that once inspired fear when they had no explanation tend to become objects of fascination as understanding grows. The feeling did not change. Our relationship to it did. There is something quietly hopeful in that pattern. It suggests that understanding does not have to drain the wonder from a thing, but can transform fear into a gentler, more open curiosity. To know that déjà vu is your own memory machinery briefly surfacing does not make it dull. It makes it interesting, a small marvel of your own mind, rather than a threat from outside it. The shift from fear to fascination is a shift we can make again and again. With each piece of the unknown we come to understand meeting what we cannot yet explain, not with dread, but with the steady, open curiosity that has carried us this far. As we near the end, hold a thought about how this most solitary of feelings is also one of the most shared. It connects the deepest privacy of your mind to nearly everyone who has ever lived. Picture the feeling at its most intimate, arising silently inside you, unspoken, entirely your own, and then picture how that same private flicker has passed through billions of others across all of human history. Déjà vu links the most private corner of your mind to nearly every other person alive. The experience is profoundly interior, felt alone, often never spoken of, woven into the silent flow of your own awareness. And yet it is shared by roughly 2/3 of all people, a sensation known in some form to almost everyone who has ever had a mind capable of memory and reflection. This is a rare and quiet kind of connection. The feeling that isolates you in the moment, that seems too strange to convey, that you hold alone, is at the same time one of the most widely shared experiences in human life. There is something deeply consoling in holding both truths at once. When déjà vu touches you, you are as alone with it as you can be, sealed inside your own private instant. And in that very moment you are joined invisibly to countless others across every age and culture who have felt something just like it, who have stood where you stand, puzzled and briefly unsettled, and then let the moment pass. The most solitary of feelings turns out to be among the most common threads of human experience. A small, strange sensation that without a word spoken links your inner life to nearly every other that has ever been. Consider what a rare vantage this feeling offers, a chance almost no other experience provides. It may be the nearest most of us ever come to actually watching our own memory at work. Picture how completely the act of remembering normally hides itself, delivering its results, while the work that produces them stays entirely out of view, forever beyond your direct sight. Déjà vu may be the closest most of us ever come to watching our own remembering happen. Memory's operation is almost always invisible, known only through what it delivers: the recognized face, the recalled name, the sense of the familiar. The process itself, the actual work of judging and constructing, runs beneath all awareness. Déjà vu, by surfacing that process through a momentary error, lets us sense it directly, as close to watching memory at work as we are likely to get. This makes the experience, for all its strangeness, a kind of rare gift of insight. It offers a fleeting view of something fundamental about ourselves that is otherwise permanently hidden from us. There is a quiet wonder in that opportunity. Each of us carries this extraordinary capacity, this constant building and sorting and recognizing that underlies our entire experience of the world, and we are almost wholly blind to it, knowing it only by its smooth and silent results. Déjà vu cracks that opacity for a single second, letting us feel the process rather than merely its product. To experience it, then, is to receive a brief and unusual glimpse into the machinery of your own mind, a momentary chance to witness the remembering that shapes everything you know. Ordinarily invisible, just this once, made faintly, strangely felt. Turn your attention to a curious emptiness at the heart of this feeling, one worth noticing directly. For all its power, it never brings any actual content, only the pure sensation of having returned. Picture the feeling stripped down to what it really contains. No scene, no memory, no detail. You could name nothing but the bare, contentless sense that this has happened before. Déjà vu never delivers any content. It brings only the sensation of return, of familiarity, of having been here before, without supplying a single piece of what you are supposedly remembering. No image, no fact, no actual past. The feeling is pure form with no substance, a sense of pastness with nothing past inside it. Notice this for yourself the next time it comes. There will be the overwhelming impression of recognition, and behind that impression, when you reach for it, nothing at all, no content the familiarity could attach to. This emptiness is the deepest clue to what the feeling really is. It is not a memory surfacing, for a memory would carry content. It is the feeling of familiarity itself, firing alone, detached from anything remembered. And there is something quietly profound in encountering a sensation so vivid and so completely hollow, a powerful sense of return that returns to nothing. It shows that the feeling of knowing is its own thing, separable from any knowledge capable of arriving entirely on its own. Déjà vu hands you the pure experience of familiarity. With the familiarity removed recognition, without anything recognized, and in that strange emptiness, reveals just how much the mind can make us feel with no actual content behind it at all. As we draw toward the close, notice what remains after the feeling itself has passed. The eeriness goes quickly, but a question it raises tends to stay with us. How can a present moment feel already owned? Picture the sensation dissolving in a second or two, the ordinary moment restored, and yet a quiet, wondering, lingering well afterward about how the now could ever have felt like a return. The strangeness of déjà vu fades almost at once, but the question it raises tends to linger far longer. How can a moment you are living for the first time feel as though it has been lived before, somehow already yours? The feeling departs quickly, yet the puzzle at its center, the sense of a present that arrives already owned, stays with many people long after the sensation is gone. This lingering question is in a way the truest legacy of the experience. The feeling itself is brief and empty, but it points towards something genuinely deep about how the mind constructs our sense of time and ownership over our own moments. There is something fitting in a sensation that lasts only seconds, leaving behind a question that can occupy us for years. The eeriness is fleeting, easily set aside. But the wonder it opens about how we come to feel that a moment belongs to us, how the present acquires its sense of being freshly and immediately ours, does not pass so easily. Déjà vu touches that ordinarily invisible process, and in doing so, plants a question that outlasts the feeling many times over. The strangeness goes, the wondering stays. And perhaps that lingering question is the real gift the experience leaves long after its momentary chill has faded into the ordinary day. Gather the threads now toward a final understanding of what this feeling truly concerns. For all that it seems to be about the past, it tells us far more about how the present itself is assembled. Picture the feeling that appears to reach backward toward some earlier living of this moment, and notice that what it actually exposes is the construction of the present happening right now. Déjà vu tells us in the end less about the past than about how the present is quietly built. The feeling masquerades as a relationship to something earlier, a memory, a prior life, a moment lived before. But there is no real past inside it. What it actually reveals is the hidden machinery by which the present moment is constructed, the constant work of judging the now as familiar or new, of building our seamless sense of the current instant. This is the deep reversal at the heart of the experience. It seems to be about then, and it is really about now, about the unseen processes that assemble each present moment and give it its texture of freshness or familiarity. There is something quietly illuminating in this final turn. We take the present for granted, as simply given, arriving directly and whole. Déjà vu shows that it is nothing of the kind, that even the basic feeling of a moment being new is the output of constant hidden construction, capable of going briefly wrong. The feeling that seemed to open a door onto the past opens instead, a window onto the present, onto the silent, ceaseless building of the now that we never otherwise glimpse. It is not a memory at all. It is the present caught for an instant in the act of being made. Here is a final insight into why this feeling exists at all, rooted in how the mind weighs its own errors. It would rather feel a false familiarity than miss a true one, and déjà vu is that preference made briefly visible. Picture the choice the brain faces in every moment, between occasionally sensing the familiar where it is not, and occasionally failing to sense it where it is, and leaning by design toward the first. The mind appears to be built so that it would rather feel a false familiarity than miss a real one, and déjà vu may be that very bias surfacing. Recognizing what is genuinely familiar, a safe place, a known face, a remembered danger, has long mattered greatly. A system tuned to catch real familiarity, even at the cost of occasional false alarms, serves us better than one so cautious it misses true recognitions. Déjà vu may be one of those rare false alarms, the price of a memory eager not to overlook the genuinely known. This casts the feeling as a side effect of something deeply useful, a small cost paid for a valuable sensitivity. The brain leans toward feeling familiarity, and now and then that leaning produces a familiarity that should not be there. There is a quiet logic in this, and even a kind of reassurance. The occasional strangeness of déjà vu is not a flaw to be corrected, but the natural consequence of a memory system wisely biased toward recognition. It would rather err on the side of feeling that something is known than risk failing to recognize what truly is. The eerie feeling in this light is the visible edge of a sensible design, a mind that values catching the real familiar so highly that it accepts as the price the rare false sense of return that we have spent all this time coming to understand. We arrive at the last few thoughts, and this one asks you to value the feeling for its sheer rarity as a window. Each time it happens, a process you normally never sense and may not feel again for a long while has briefly stepped into view. Picture the vast stretches of ordinary experience between one episode and the next, months perhaps in which the machinery of familiarity runs flawlessly and silently, never once surfacing into what you can feel. Each time déjà vu happens, an ordinary process that you will not feel again for some time has briefly become visible. The constant judging of the familiar against the new runs beneath your awareness continuously, and only on these rare occasions does it rise into experience. Between episodes, it returns entirely to the dark, doing its essential work, unfelt, as it does almost always. This rarity is part of what makes each instance worth pausing over. It is a brief, uncommon glimpse of something otherwise permanently hidden, a momentary lifting of a curtain that stays closed nearly all the time. There is a quiet invitation in seeing it this way. Rather than meeting the feeling with unease, you might meet it with a kind of attention, recognizing it as one of those uncommon moments when the unseen workings of your own mind briefly show themselves. It will pass in a second or two and sink back out of reach the process, returning to its silent labor. But for that one strange instant, you were given something rare, a felt glimpse of the ceaseless, invisible work that builds your every moment, surfacing just long enough to be noticed before it disappears again into the ordinary depths from which it came. Consider what this feeling quietly requires of you, the small act it demands in the instant it appears. It asks you to distrust for one moment a sense you have relied upon completely your entire life. Picture how absolutely you trust your feeling of familiarity in every ordinary moment, accepting without question that what feels known is known, what feels new is new, never once doubting it. Déjà vu asks you to distrust for a single moment, a feeling you have trusted your whole life. All your days you have relied on your sense of familiarity as a faithful guide, accepting its verdicts automatically and completely. In the instant of déjà vu, that sense delivers a familiarity you must override, a feeling you have to recognize as false, even as you feel its full force. For one moment, you are required to doubt the very faculty you normally trust without thinking. This is a strange and unusual demand, and meeting it is exactly what keeps healthy déjà vu healthy. You feel the familiarity, and you decline to believe it, holding firm to what you know is true, against what you cannot help but feel. There is a quiet strength in that small act of refusal, performed in a second and then forgotten. It is a moment in which your knowledge stands against your feeling and prevails, in which you trust what you know over what you sense. We rarely have cause to do this, because our feelings of familiarity rarely lead us astray. But when déjà vu comes, you do it almost without effort, setting aside a lifelong trust for a single instant, refusing a feeling you have never had reason to refuse before. In that brief, quiet act of discernment lies the whole difference between a passing curiosity and something that could trouble a life. As we approach the final thought, let the feeling point us one last time, not toward itself, but toward everything around it. Its deepest lesson may be about all the other moments, the countless seconds in which memory and the present hold together perfectly. Picture the rare instant of déjà vu, set against the unbroken expanse of ordinary experience surrounding it. Every other moment in which past and present fit together so smoothly, you never notice them joining. Perhaps the deepest lesson of déjà vu is how seamlessly in every other second of your life memory and the present moment hold together. The feeling is striking precisely because it is the exception, the rare instant, when the join slips and becomes visible. And in being the exception, it reveals the rule, the vast, silent, near-perfect integration of remembering and perceiving that constitutes nearly all of your experience. This is the gift hidden in the anomaly. By showing you what it feels like when the seam shows déjà vu, lets you appreciate, however briefly, the astonishing smoothness of all the moments when it does not. There is something quietly moving in that final perspective. We have spent all this time on the rare, strange flicker, and in the end it turns our attention back toward the ordinary, toward the immense and unbroken competence of a mind that nearly every moment binds memory and present into a single, seamless experience, without the slightest effort or error. Déjà vu is the rare catch in a process of breathtaking reliability, and its truest meaning may lie not in the strangeness of the slip, but in the silent, constant, almost perfect holding together that surrounds it, the seamless making of now from then that carries you through nearly every moment of your life, unnoticed and unfailing. We come at last to the final thought, the one that gathers everything we have explored into a single quiet idea. The memory you cannot explain may be nothing more than the one moment your mind allowed you to watch it working. Picture the whole vast hidden apparatus of your memory, laboring ceaselessly and invisibly through all your days, and then this single rare instant in which it stepped briefly into the light of your awareness. The memory you cannot explain may simply be the one moment your mind let you watch it work. Everything we have traced points toward this. Déjà vu is not a message, not a glimpse of another life, not a window onto the future. It is the rare surfacing of your own memory machinery, the constant judging of familiar and new, ordinarily silent, briefly made felt through a small and harmless error. The feeling cannot be fully explained, in part because what it shows you is so close, so fundamental, so woven into the fabric of your every moment, that you have never had to think about it before. And so the mystery in the end turns out to be a kind of intimacy. The memory you cannot explain is your own mind, glimpsed in the act of doing what it does every second, sorting time, building the present, holding past and now together. For one strange instant the curtain lifts, and you feel the working of the very thing that makes you who you are, the remembering that underlies all your knowing. It is the most ordinary process in the world, and the most extraordinary, and déjà vu is simply the rare moment it let you watch. We have traveled a long way together, from a phrase coined by a man who chased the paranormal through operating rooms and word lists and virtual corridors, all the way to this quiet final understanding. And what we found again and again was that the strangeness pointed not outward to other worlds, but inward to the astonishing ordinary mind each of us carries. The feeling that seemed to reach across lifetimes reaches only across a few hidden seconds. The sense of prophecy turns out to be memory misread. The eeriness is your own mind keeping faith with reality, refusing a familiarity it cannot justify. And beneath the single rare slip lies a vast and silent reliability, a memory that binds past and present into a seamless now nearly every moment of your life, asking nothing, announcing nothing, simply holding the world together so that you can live in it. So the next time it comes, that brief, impossible sense of return, you might meet it differently, not with unease, but with a quiet recognition that you are for a second or two watching your own remembering happen, glimpsing the hidden work that makes every ordinary moment possible. It will pass quickly, as it always does, and leave nothing behind but the memory that it came. And that, perhaps, is exactly as it should be. Thank you for spending this time here with me. Until next time.